Hi everyone, and welcome back to London 2050 to panel number 3, a place in the city, where we take a 360 view of the London real estate market. This panel is organized primarily by the LSE Greg Group, the Global Alumni Real Estate Group, and I'm going to hand over to the president of that group and her team who organized this, Didem. So Didem, over to you.
Hello everyone, welcome to London 2050 and the third panel of today, A Place in the City. My name is Didem Erendil and I'm the president for LSE Global Real Estate Group, which is an international special interest alumni group that aims to foster business relationships among LSE alumni practicing real estate and also create discussions around a better and sustainable real estate as an asset class. Today, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers to discuss the future of London real estate market. And on behalf of myself and London 2050 team, I would like to thank you for joining us today and hope you'll enjoy the discussions. A quick reminder as well that you can use the comment sections to share questions and comments to engage with our panel. We encourage you to do that. And with that, it's my privilege to introduce the chair of the panel, Carlo Castelli, who is the head of City Solutions Europe at Jacobs and also an LSE alumni. Carlo, over to you.
Thank you, Didem, and thank you, LSE Greg, and this fantastic event. We've got a great lineup of speakers today. I'm delighted and honored to guide through some reflections I'm looking forward to. Obviously, we are, live in interesting, fantastic, extraordinary times. The last 9 months have been challenging for everyone. London is navigating the current times incredibly well. It's proving to be one of the most resilient global cities. And really, we're looking forward to kind of hear from our speakers today on how London can perform even better, maintain its position as a global city globally, and really looking forward to the next 30 years, particularly think about how the real estate industry and world can support that position. So I'm going to hand over shortly to our speakers, asking them to introduce themselves and also introducing talking about their passion, the way they relate to London, and really kind of what kind of thoughts and passions they have for our city. I would start with Michelle Dix from TfL, Managing Director for Crossroad 2. Michelle. Hello, Michelle, can you hear us? Maybe waiting for Michelle to resolve maybe some technical glitches. James Lay from Callison RTKL.
Hi everyone. Hi, my name is James Lay from Callison RTKL. I'm also a co-chair of your Index Group. So my passion for London, I've been living in the UK for over 30 years, and I originally come from Hong Kong. And I love London. It's to me, it's very much like Hong Kong in a way where, it is home for me. I think the one thing that I think is important with regard to London in terms of the 2050 is, tackle the population issue in terms of we will have 11 million people. It's projected to have 11 million people by 2050. So currently, what we're looking at is, since COVID, what we have learned from COVID was, when we are not going into city, we actually have fantastic green air. We have fantastic green spaces, and I think these amenities need to stay, and we need to expand on that. And then the other thing that what we also think that we need to also look at is actually attracting global talent to compete with places like Paris, Berlin, San Francisco, New York. You know, in the recent UI and EY global trend, London was actually placed number 2, and it was number 4 the year before. So we're actually doing better than before. But what we need to do is constantly staying up there. And apart from the global challenge, what we also have to tackle is, I think, is social mobility. That's something that is quite close to me. And I think, you know, we have to encourage people from disadvantaged background to get into real estate. And I could talk about a little bit about that a bit later.
Thank you very much, James. That's excellent. Andy Saul from Pi Labs.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Carlo. I'm Andy Saul. I'm a research associate at Pi Labs. Pi Labs is a PropTech venture capital firm based in Europe. So we invest in the next real estate technology startups that are going to impact the future of hopefully all cities, but certainly London. Previous to that, I was a research assistant at the Oxford Future Real Estate Initiative, which is a university group that look at the impact of PropTech on the real estate market in the next 5 to 10 year horizon. My particular interests are in the social side of sustainability, so the S in ESG. I like to phrase the example of why we go online to scour numerous hotels, to look at numerous rooms in numerous different locations at different price points before spending a long weekend break somewhere. Yet the offices we work in every day, almost for years on end, go without such scrutiny. So really understanding whether these social metrics, these new measurements of social sustainability will bleed through into the real estate market is my personal passion. But I'm currently writing a report on ESG and real estate. And today I'm going to hopefully show you a few slides on the environmental impact of the current real estate stock and how technology can help towards the net zero carbon 2050 goals.
Thank you very much, Andy. Lots of interesting themes already kind of outlined by you and James, and some threads already starting to be outlined. I can see Michelle has some technical issues we're going to hope to clarify and resolve. Peter Epping from Hines. Hello, Peter.
Hi, Carlo. Thank you for having me today. It's a real pleasure to join this panel on a very interesting topic, gazing this far into the future. My name is Peter Epping. I've been with Hines for a very long time, almost 20 years now, and have lived in London 17 of those 20 years. And at that time, I've worked on the development side of our business, initially developing projects in Germany, thereafter in various European countries, Italy and France, and for the last about 10 years have been a fund manager, investing with several of our European vehicles in many European cities. And what's been interesting in that time was really observing, on the one hand, how London changed. When I arrived in London, being only 20 years old, and enjoying the fun that it offered in central areas all around town, it was interesting to see how that has changed today, how the city has become a lot more commercial. And at the same time, seeing how in a much slower way the European cities either were mirroring that or were going a slightly different route. And for us, it's what we're trying to do. We're obviously a commercial enterprise. So while ESG is very high on our agenda, commercial viability plays an important role. And it's been one of the hallmarks of the founder of a company to initially marry architectural design quality with commercial projects. It was one of the first to use big name architects for office buildings. But today, I think we're one step further, and it's really about marrying commercial viability with buildings and city blocks and the public realm that is inclusive, that offers space for everyone in our cities. Because otherwise, I think we face a danger of them becoming bland and boring. That I'll explore a little bit later.
Thank you very much, Peter. Very, very interesting. We probably arrived at the same time, pretty much at the same time, because I've always also celebrated my 17th birthday in London recently. So maybe we can check on dates separately. But yeah, change, commercial enterprise, and development, and how sort of architectural design quality can sort of be married up to sort of city strategies and solutions. That's really interesting. Waiting for Michelle, our colleagues from the LSE and technical are resolving the issue with Michelle. But perhaps we can get started with some reflections. What we wanted to do, and kind of all the speakers have sort of frame their passion and really kind of allegiance to London. What we were thinking to do in the next 30, 40 minutes is actually kind of almost kind of swap analyzing London and really kind of look at sort of the fantastic opportunities and strengths that our capital city has from a real estate point of view, but also kind of going beyond. And at the same time, kind of touching upon the various themes that the speakers have touched upon, and go also through the threats and challenges that the city is facing moving forward. Obviously, the last kind of 5 years have presenting kind of some of those. They're kind of panning out as we speak, and we're looking at the last year have been quite heavy on the capital and the rest of the country and globally, of course. So really kind of looking forward to hear your thoughts on somehow kind of a SWOT analysis for London. James Ley, would you like to go first and kind of sharing some ideas on how you see London performing?
Yes, of course. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you could all see it.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Great. I'm going to start looking at. I'm probably going to start to talk about what have we been through in the last kind of 8 to 10 months. I'll tell you a little bit about Calasanati KL. We started in 1946, and we are part of the Cadiz family since 2007. Calasan actually joined RTKL in 2014, and we are about 1,500 architects strong. We actually do lots of different things, but the foundation is actually starting from urban planning and architectural design. And we have diverse global practice. We have 20 offices. We cover 4 regions: the Americas, UK, Middle East, Asia, and China. So we see ourselves as one firm. We are agile, we're connected, and we are responsive, but also we see ourselves as a cultural agent. We have global knowledge and local perspectives. So what we're going to look at is what happened before, and we're going to have a look at predicting what we're going to be in the future. So come and join me on the journey. So what happened pre-COVID? Where were we? What happened in terms of we think we know that retail was actually wasn't doing great, and then we also know that department stores, shopping centers, they were struggling, and in some way they were closing, and online shopping was on the rise and looming. Offices was actually doing quite well. And then COVID came along, everything changed. The retail, people always know retail is a changing game, but nothing like it. Retail is always changing, yes, but it was nothing like what we had. We had we're online store that came up, and Amazon actually did fantastically well during, everyone look at Amazon's when we were during lockdown to buy masks, to buy different things. And how are we going to, how are we changing is actually quite important. So what we're going to look at is some trends that it actually had before, and what we actually came out after lockdown, or hopefully after lockdown when we have the vaccine. So we're going to have the best bit of the lockdown. So bear in mind, what we're looking at this was at the beginning of the COVID, we were told that we only allow 1 hour to go out. And our step count, we all have a step count, and yes, the step count were down, but then again, we all did exercise indoor, and this should continue. Long live and continue. We are all amateur in terms of cooking. Most of us are, and then we could, with a click of the button, we can all work along or cook alongside Michelin star from our own kitchen. We all did, our own birthday cards for our families, and this was fantastic. We all appreciate nature like never before. Because we were locked down, we weren't allowed to go out. But we actually bought some plants. We are looking at house plants and biophilia because home, we spend our time at home all the time. So we are really much embracing the natural world, both inside and outside. Working from home. Yes, we're all working from home now, but it's been around for a long time. But now, it's very different when you do it ad hoc, and usually most of the time we're based in the office. So the difference is previously working from home was you got to have a conversation. It's a special case. You got to have you got to have a special reason for it. Now it's a given. We all do it. So it's not a trend anymore. It's actually going to be what happens. So how does that impact on office work? The community side, where when we all collapse for the NHS, we all actually know our neighbors much more. We've been locked down for 9 months, 8 months, and we now have the chat. We all know our neighbors. We all have, if you didn't know them before, we chat over the fence, we chat at our door front steps. The relationship has gone much further, and this is here to stay. We're going to build on that connections. At the beginning of the lockdown, supermarket slot was incredibly hard to get. If you managed to get one, fantastic. But if you didn't, the next one is actually going to be 3 weeks on. My neighbors, who is 87, we're trying to help him to get supermarkets. Not ever was impossible. Even the NHS was trying to help them, and what we ended up with is actually getting greengrocers from our NOCO, and we went to the butchers and we got the milkmen. These are and we're getting the local produce, which are fantastic. We may pay more, but we get you get what you pay for. So these are suppliers which are local, and we're forming a relationship. We are actually doing much more with our local communities. Another one is the good thing was the family value. I've got 2 little kids, and I've never spent that much time with them since since they were born. It's fantastic, but also challenging at the same time. But what we found was spending time together. Now they're all back to school, but from the homeschooling to making cakes together, drawing together, yes, it's been hard work, but at the same time, it's very rewarding. And we know that these family values are fantastic, and we need to keep them, and long live for family values. Another one, what we found during COVID was global connections. We're all on Zoom, we're all on Teams or different kind of relationship in terms of connecting with people. And what we found was previously, it used to be a barrier on internet. You would try to have face-to-face meeting as much as possible, but then again, now it's a given. But the only issue is the time frame. And the best thing, we are kind of safe. The best thing to last is actually climate. And what we found was, we all know that during lockdown, we have dolphins back in front of the Mars Square. London CO2 was 60% down. These are things which we always wanted to have, but never managed to do it. But because of COVID, these are the great things that we actually managed to get now, and we need to hang on to those. So keep hold of the good bits. I'm just going to go quickly because of the time issue. What we from what we learned, what we think is important is actually looking at how we actually came from. Where we are now, we're kind of yesterday, where we all travel in. We are the great dots travel into the city. And then now today, what we are doing is we are actually connecting. So these are physical, the dotted lines are the internet connections where we're actually outside the city. We're not traveling in anymore. But what we see in, what we think that it will be, what will happen in future is that we will have centers which are closer to where we are instead of in, say, central London, maybe in Zone 2, Zone 3, and then people will travel in there, and then we get connected that way. And this is something like, if you use an analogy, is, city is like an egg, where, traditionally in ancient time it was like a boiled egg, we all go in, and then now, and then 17th, 19th century, it's much bigger. It's like a fry egg, then it's because the city got much bigger. And now it's like a scrambled egg because, we all mingle, and because of internet connections, everything, that we're actually much closer to everybody. And where we're looking at is decentralization. What we're looking at is a lot of different hubs, much smaller hubs in cities, and then what we're looking at is 20 minutes town, 45 minutes city, meaning 9 out of 10 people could probably walk or cycle to the city center, and this is within 45 minutes, and then less than 20 minutes you could get to the nearest neighborhood. And then what we're looking at is, yes, in order to do that, you need a much better infrastructure. And that's where, where we're looking at, from 4 car lanes, it go down to 2, and then you have 2 for cycle lanes. And this is what we're looking at in terms of changing from the city to town. So you have much more districts, smaller, but then you have all the essential that you need. It's like a mixed-use city. And what we find is this is going to be a blended building. This is what we're coming into. Blended building mixed use is not new. In fact, in 1976, this is something that came from Urban Land Institute. And what we see is we don't see it as a single-use building is this future. What we find is single use, and then we need to make it into mixed use. But at the same time, what we're looking at in future is actually a blended use, meaning you have 1 + 1 is not equal to 2, but equal to a lot more, because you get the interaction, you get the relationships, and then you actually start talking to people. This is not new at all. And back in 1952, Le Corbusier have already done this on a vertical garden city in Marseille, and this is something that we hope that it will happen. But the main thing is, how do we do it? This is not new. Everyone is looking for mixed use, and from sports building to healthcare, workplace, and higher education. So how is this being done? What are some of the up and new usage? Is beyond residential, beyond offices, and beyond hotel. The conversion of uses and typologies means that we have to think beyond the walls and really think about the entire experience. So, and this is what we're looking at: seamless blend for the whole lifestyle. So I've got some really quick example to show you, and these are examples that we've done previously. And this is in Washington, D.C. We've got a shopping center which is actually failing. And what we did was, it's actually quite tired and in need of refurbishment. And what we did was we actually took out the external the mall section, and then we actually carved the shopping center up. And then we actually created a residential tower on the corner, and then a public open space on the other side. And what that did was it helps to create more value for the site. So this is a residential tower. So there's an absolute new usage for that. And then also we created open air space, and this is pre-COVID. And we've been doing that just because we know that indoor shopping center is actually, some of them is failing, and because of the neighborhood, and it needed to make a big change. And then what we've actually done is actually created, we refurbished the shopping center, but actually created value, created open space, and which is what people want. And then with another example where we are looking at it's like a retail shopping center which was failing, and what we did was we actually looking at how we could actually create usage out of it in terms of changing the way how the internal usage work, and then actually putting different usage. And what we've done is we actually created quite a few options in terms of putting offices, putting hotel, putting residential in the block itself, and actually creating different versions, and to see what is the most value that we could get from the client, as well as the blended use between all the different usage. So these are all the different usage that you could do in terms of a hotel, a residential tower, offices. And then this is another one where we think, what Peter was talking about in terms of public realm. This is a tower that we actually refurbished opposite the Bernabeu in Madrid. It's in a fantastic location. We have a tenant, our client has a tenant that actually owns 60%, rented 60% of the building, and it was they actually gone because the building wasn't up to scratch. And what we decided to do was we actually created a much bigger public realm, creating the top and the bottom level. And this actually helps to create a great entrance. These are all CGIs. And then open up the public space, but also creating a building that is zero CO2. We reduce the electricity and reduce the water level, but also we actually make much better use of the building building management systems. So this was before and this is after. And then we have a much nicer entrance, grand entrance, but this is the public realm that we actually created and actually created value for our client. Public space needs money in terms of creating good public realm. And the last, very quickly, is the Station Hill. This is a project where it's a build-to-rent project that we are currently working on, and we see that the build-to-rent is going to be here to stay, and it's actually coming started from America, where we've been actually doing for a long time. And we think that the local working hub, it could have a local working hub within the build-to-rent space, and then it could integrate with the streets much better. It might have a crash, but it'll open up to other people as well. And then this is a kind of a sketch showing how the usage between all the spaces can be linked in the public realm. That's it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Jeff. An excellent start of our reflections. You touch upon all the sort of themes that have characterized, and somehow we kind of woken up to in the last 9 months. We kind of realized how important certain things are for our livelihood. Things that kind of somehow are taken for granted. Often, to family values. From family values to kind of working from home and having kind of more flexibility, the authenticity of certain experiences from a trade and exchange point of view, body and mind. Really, really excellent kind of outline of themes. And actually, one thing that kind of really resonated with me was you said we need to kind of hang on to those. I hear a lot from kind of my sort of conversations and exchange with clients, peers, and partners on how we kind of realize how important those trends are. They were there before, but somehow we've been waking up to them, and we need to kind of hang on to those. And I think the window of opportunity is actually kind of relatively short. So we need to kind of really jump on to kind of solutions that can enable us to hang on. You talked about the hyper-local dimension with the whole kind of 15 minutes city that is currently very much talked about after the mayor of Paris particularly embraced that as a policy. Obviously, kind of question is whether the fantastic diagrams that you shared with us, is whether we're going to move completely from the traditional kind of centripetal model, from kind of moving from the inside to the from outside to inside, and vice versa, to kind of a much more integrated network of relationships. Obviously, kind of coupled with a blend of uses that you talked about. And I think one of the things I would like to investigate with you as well, and I'm sure also kind of Peter and Andy will contribute to that, is how kind of the whole kind of real estate industry and approach are actually kind of geared up for really promoting and supporting that kind of blend of views. And obviously, from Michelle as well, how infrastructure and development can really kind of talk to each other and really kind of support each other. And you've got a fantastic history from that point of view. Last thing before kind of handing on to the next speaker, you talked also a lot about flexibility and adaptability of buildings and spaces, which I totally agree. I couldn't agree more. I often talk about generosity as well to buildings and spaces. For too often we've been squeezing things. Think about efficiency, as kind of the ultimate value. But actually, maybe there's again, as part of that window of opportunities, we need to kind of reflect whether that was the right thing to do, or maybe we need to think about, again, in terms of generosity, to kind of really achieve resilience for London. It's a great presentation. Really enjoyed it. I just wanted to kind of give Michelle, which I'm really happy to have with us today as well. Maybe Michelle, if you want to kind of introduce yourself and kind of share your passions and relation to London. Hello. So we still have some technical.
Thank you, Carlo. Can I share my head's internet connections?
we can hear you. Yes,
Can you hear
we can hear you. And please introduce yourself. And yeah, we want.
Can you hear me, Carlo?
Yeah, we can. So we still have some.
You can hear.
We can hear you.
Well, you said for me to say my likes. I've just said what my hates were. It's internet connections and computers. So sorry about that.
No problem.
In terms of who I am, I'm a civil engineer. Still can't hear? You can hear?
Yes.
Let me go and get some headphones, see if that makes it any better. You get on to the next person to talk about their thing, and I'll come back.
Perfect. Thank you. So, Andy, would you like to share your views, please?
Yeah, sure. It's quite interesting. As part of my research, I recently wrote a piece on people's frustration with current technology and Wi-Fi connectivity. So we're trying to compare previous pandemics and the adoption of technology in previous pandemics to this current pandemic and whether it will increase the adoption of technology. So that's something I'm happy to talk about, but a few slides to chat to you about today. So let me check if my screen will actually share. So
thank you.
Go how that works. Are you able to see that orange screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So as I mentioned, I'm researching ESG currently. My passion lies in the S, but I thought it was particularly pertinent to discuss the E, given that this panel was about was about London 2050. And we all know that there's a net zero carbon deadline that many cities and countries around the world have signed up to by 2050. And I'm going to give a very, very contrarian view around why, under the current frameworks, London's buildings will not be carbon neutral by 2050. And as much debate, I've done this purposely to spark a bit of thought, a bit of discussion. So I'm sure we'll get there eventually, but I feel that currently not enough is being done. So let me talk you through why I believe this is the case. It's well known that 40% of greenhouse gas comes from buildings, the built environment sector. In London, this is taken from the Estates Gazette. We can see that actually buildings that have an EPC rating, that's an energy performance certificate rating of A or B, so a more positive rating, are fetching a 12% premium in the market above those buildings that have a C or D, so a worse performing energy metric. So this is great. Within M&G's portfolio, they did a study that showed that certified buildings, so that's those with a BREEAM or LEED, so an environmental sustainability rating, were actually affecting a yield premium of 53 basis points. So this is really good. So the London real estate market values sustainability. We are prepared to pay more for assets that perform in an environmentally friendly way. Or do we? So this next graph is from the BBP, the Better Buildings Partnership. And they found that there is no significant rating between a commercial building's EPC rating and its operational energy efficiency. So you can see their bands A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H all have very, very similar median across all the different commercial assets. What's more, Innovate UK performed a study that showed that on average, buildings perform 3.8 times less efficiently in operation than intended at design. And one building in this study was performing 10 times, so it was using 10 times more energy than it intended to at design, had actually been achieved at BREEAM certification of excellence. So now I ask you, what are we actually paying for? Why are we paying for premiums on EPC when they mean nothing? Why are we paying for premiums on accreditations that mean nothing? This finding is also backed up by the fact that in this M&G study, those buildings that had the certifications were also costing more to run, so implying that they were using more energy. So fortunately, technology is a catalyst for sustainable change. This is not even a heading I wrote. This is the chapter of the UBS study, in which they say the use of new technology is essential if a range of sustainability KPIs is to be efficiently and economically reported on. This is also a view supported by BlackRock in their Global Megatrends report, in which they outline the 4 global megatrends I'm sure we're all very aware of: rapid urbanization, demographic and social change, climate change, and the emerging global wealth, which I presume they mean disparities in global wealth. But at the center of this, they put technological breakthrough as the core to mitigating some of these adverse effects. Now, this is something we're very keen on at PILab. So our role is to actually invest in new technologies, and particularly with environmental energy efficiency, we like to invest in smart building technologies. So it's reported that 70% of the UK office energy energy consumption is through the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. So this is something we're particularly targeting. So we've invested in one company called Office App, and they enable real-time usage data, which can allows for a demand-driven heating, ventilation, and air conditioning appliance. So only those rooms and areas that are actually being used are those being heated and ventilated, etc., saving on energy. Demand Logic, they're a building energy management system optimization platform, so they can identify if any particular electronic feature within a building is using more energy than it should, and thus is more likely to fault or can be fixed, and thus lower the energy consumption of a building. Well, 720 Degrees are a smart heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system that are able to use ventilate based on weather forecasts, and so again only using the heating and ventilation when necessary. They also offer a air purification technology that allows for, which has been shown in many studies, to increase the well-being and productivity of employees or occupants of that building. So I've kept this deliberately short because I'd like to kind of spark a bit of debate and have time for discussion with everyone else. But in the theme of the SWOT analysis that Carlo wanted us to present, I believe the London real estate market's strength is that it does value sustainability. We are paying premiums for assets we believe to be more sustainable. However, the weakness is that there are poor current measurements, and upon these measurements, the regulations therefore perhaps aren't fulfilling their purpose. The opportunities in emerging technologies to identify these weaknesses, to overcome them, and to present new frameworks and new ways of measuring the operational energy efficiency of buildings. And the threat that I haven't touched on, but is the retrofitting problem. And that is the idea that 70% of buildings that are in use by 2050 have already been built. A lot of those buildings do not have smart systems in. So the threat is, while these technologies exist, how do we get this put into all the commercial building stock and the residential building stock within London in order that they can meet minimum energy efficiency standards come 2050? So hopefully I can now stop screen chat.
That's fantastic, Andy. That was excellent. Really interesting. And really kind of summarize, at the end what speakers said, but you've done it brilliantly with a SWOT. Really interesting. Actually, I was on 80% of the building currently existing will be in 2050. You said 70, but I'm happy to. It's still kind of fantastic, significantly proportion of it. So when we kind of worried about new build, we also kind of need to, and that kind of also kind of links up to the authenticity value that James was talking about, and kind of character. And I know, Peter, having worked with Hines and actually having been on one of those workshops with Jerry Hines, as I said before, I really know how, Hines also kind of value that kind of identity and character that kind of only existing buildings can. So not just a chore, but actually kind of a fantastic opportunity. And if you think about kind of all the major regeneration schemes in London, starting with King's Cross, they really kind of put existing buildings at the core of what those developments are about. The other thing I wanted to highlight, and I really want to kind of, all of us to kind of contribute to kind of leave some strengths, some opportunities, for ourselves and the audience as well, so that we can continue that conversation and contribute to the debate and in support of London. What James was talking about in terms of kind of 15-minute cities, I think by thinking about the way that London is structured through its existing buildings as well, and the whole kind of Abercrombie model of collection of villages, somehow London is already fantastically well positioned to kind of really support that 15-minute cities. And a lot of people kind of were noticing how, yes, maybe the city centre, City of London, is actually kind of suffering a little bit, from current pandemic, and Oxford Street and other kind of West End areas, but area 2, 3, and 4 are actually kind of buzzing and thriving, and kind of seeing kind of local businesses really kind of benefiting from people kind of working from home. So lots of really interesting opportunities and strengths for London. You also talked about, Andy, about KPIs and how we monitor success over time, which I think is terribly critically important, and not only for planning and design stage, but also kind of, and more particularly for after post-occupancy and post-construction, with your fantastic summary at the end. So really, really great progress so far. I would like to now try again with Michelle. Can you hear us? Can we try and hear from you, Michelle, on your passion and introduction? Yeah. And mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
I'm unmuted.
You're unmuted.
Can you hear? Right, this is the third time. If it doesn't work, I'm going. All right. Okay. Thank you very much. So I'm sort of like at TfL. I'm the managing director for Crossrail 2, which was until recently a major infrastructure project that would promote growth, promote homes across London. But it's been paused until we've got some money. My background is as a civil engineer, but I did a PhD in land use and transport planning, and the relationship between transport and development has been something that's sort of been a passion in my career, linking growth to transport. So rather than just sort of solving transport problems when they arise because congestion arises, it's been about where can you provide transport to help that development take place. And when I was the managing director for planning, which is my job previous to this, one of the things that we did was to ensure that the London Spatial Plan, the London Plan, and as was the London Economic Development Plan that was led by the LDA as was, and the Mayor's Transport Strategy were developed together, so that you came up with a plan that ensured that you could sort of put homes, jobs in places where transport could be readily provided and made sense, particularly in terms of supporting public transport, and that it would support the economic growth of London. And at that time, which was back in 2010, there was much talk about a more decentralised London and how you could have more centres, going back to the old sort of like district centres, metropolitan centres, and more dispersed transport patterns. But in a world then where car was still very sort of much in favour, particularly in outer London, all the modelling work that we showed to try and disperse the population and disperse the jobs showed people moving more back to car than they would otherwise to walk or cycle. So I know sort of like we'll talk about sort of like the what 2050 will look like, but much of my world has been brought up in trying to understand those relationships and how we can get sort of like better relationships between development and transport, and absolutely avoid the use of unsustainable modes. So promoting transport-led development. So that's who I am. Thank you.
Fantastic, Michelle. And I just want to kind of take the opportunity to kind of remind ourselves how lucky we are to have this kind of range of backgrounds and expertise across the board, before kind of handing over to Peter for his reflections on London. But a few points on Michelle's introduction, to just to remind ourselves as well how in terms of strength, governance is also so important. It's unthinkable to think, sorry about the wordplay, that until kind of 20 years ago, London didn't have an elected mayor, didn't have a kind of a TfL. Actually, TfL is kind of celebrating its 20th birthday this year. Talk about a lot about birthdays today, but governance and the way the kind of land use strategies and transport planning, particularly not only for major infrastructure pieces, but also kind of secondary and tertiary networks of transport to kind of really spread across those kind of socioeconomic benefit of connectivity are incredibly important. So very, very lucky to have Michelle today with us as well. Peter, would you like to give us your reflections on how London will be doing in the next 30 years with your crystal ball?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Carlo. And first of all, congratulations, by the way, on choosing the theme and the topic looking as far as 2050. Because by doing that, you make sure that I wouldn't show up with some research graphs of where rents and yields will go over the next 5 years, and wouldn't show off our latest projects that we're currently working on, because in 2050 probably a lot of this will be history. But I like the challenge because it really forces you to look, of course, at data, but look beyond that a little bit and look at what are the drivers of different types of human behaviors individually, but also collectively. And as you can imagine, the question of office or the workspace especially has been one that's debated very heavily in the whole industry, in our firm, but also privately. It's interesting to see how many people are touched by that. And a bit closer to home for us who are Londoners, it's also been a really interesting period of reflection where a lot of my friends and colleagues, or those who are not Londoners or even from the UK initially, have spent significant times away from London. And it kind of makes you revisit, why are you in London? Why is it the place you chose to? And will you come back, or will you not? And all those experiences we have discussed in our firm, and are thinking about what does it mean for London? Where will it go? And the pressure points that COVID, the pandemic has highlighted are, I think, generally, or most of them are known. But clearly, the one that keeps coming up at the top of everything is the pricing, the cost of living in London, and generally the whole topic of affordability. When you ask around, and I'm sure many of the listeners today will have friends and family who don't work in real estate or finance and who are not on big salaries. In my circle, and of my colleagues, there's been a lot of people who've taken this chance to move away, and in a moment where London cannot live up to its full potential of offering the entertainment, restaurants, everything, quite a significant amount of people have made the decision to go away, at least temporarily. But there are others. Of course, there's the pandemic itself. There's something, a concept I didn't know existed, but it's called enochlophobia. It's the fear of crowded spaces, whether it's on the tube, in buses, anywhere, which for obvious reasons has been a driver for families or people generally to move out of the city and get more space. There's also the issue of freight and the continued growth that we've seen already before the pandemic. And online retail, of course, is one of the big contributors to that. You have 90% of all freight in London is carried by road. And And if you look at the peak hours in London, a third of that traffic is in peak hours. So it's a major pressure point on London. And the population is expected to reach 10 million already over the next decade. Whether that continues until 2050, we'll have to see. But certainly the pressure on the city seems to be growing, just in a moment where we're not allowed to be as dense anymore. So there are these different pressure points, and there are some actions are being taken. One of the, I think, good initiatives by the GLA is the mayor's plan for street space, where they want to create an even bigger cycle and pedestrian network. People continue to talk about the Thames as a mode of transportation for goods or people. Whether that will happen or not, we'll have to see. It's an age-old topic. And there are other measures. So there is reason to believe you can be pessimistic. Of course, we forget to talk about Brexit, which is, of course, still hanging over, still not resolved. It's kind of the forgotten problem. But that in itself seems to be a good example about the resilience of London. And that's something that we always come back to when we discuss with our strategy and research teams where the city is going. London is the biggest city in Western Europe, and therefore the prime example of what makes a city attractive. And what we come back to is essentially that the transfer of knowledge is the quickest face-to-face between humans. Many of you will have read Ed Glazer's book from 2011, Triumph of the City, where he explains all the dynamics that are based on that very simple principle of face-to-face interaction and what it means, and what it means for the opportunity set you have in a city. And that we find is still true. And we found that the brief period between the two lockdowns now over the summer was a very good case study in that regard, because what we observed was that people were very keen to come back to the office at least for a couple of days or 3 days a week. And typically the younger the people were, the more keen they were to be back. So that for us is a very strong reason to continue to believe in the viability of London as a place. However, and clearly we all expect that it will somewhat evolve. And what we do think that the trend that seems to be really strong is that offices and their connectivity needs to ever increase. And I'm sure Michelle will be thinking about that day and night as she is, but Crossrail already is making such a big difference as an addition to London's already sophisticated transport network. But from our perspective, this will only be ever more amplified, and probably even more than people expect today, so that people can come to offices easily for a day from a town that's a bit further away, or fly into London and easily get to their offices. So we think that the city scape will evolve to some extent around that, but it's not only about connectivity, it's also about the quality of the public realm and the quality of the offer we see. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges the city in some ways is facing. We have invested in several schemes along the Oxford Street corridor over the last few months. The Bond Street, Oxford Street part, we made 2 investments. And then just a few weeks ago, we acquired a building on Soho Square, between Soho Square and Dean Street. Really part of town where a lot of activity is happening, and where we see that tenants from tech space, TMT in general, consultants, but also PE firms and others are drawn to this area, and drawn by the mix of the offer you have. more interesting restaurants, less posh or over-the-top kind of restaurants. You have more interesting bars. You have more different types of firms and a whole different ecosystem that you move around during the day. And that we're finding is more interesting for occupiers and people working in those offices. Now, the challenge I think we're all facing is that we don't want to destroy the reason why people move there by making schemes overly commercial and driving rents up to levels that are unsustainable over time. And that fundamentally what we feel is a challenge. And how we try to address that is by underwriting investments with more moderate assumptions, keeping overall spaces in buildings, not only mixing users like James was already well describing, but also making sure you have a mix of affordability within buildings. And that way, keeping a more interesting mix of tenants for the building, but also you're actually doing something that's for the long term. If you want to keep your building till 2050, is recommendable because you have more room and a bigger target audience. A similar thing where we're doing with an investment in Covent Garden on Drury Lane that we acquired actually just before the pandemic hit. But also here in pockets of Covent Garden that are not as commercial yet, we're also trying there to find the right balance between upgrading the space of a building and its appearance in the streetscape, but at the same time trying to stick to a use concept that is overall sustainable. Those are a couple of examples, and generally I voiced some doubts in the beginning, but we do think that once the pandemic is over, we do think that a place like London will remain very relevant and highly attractive. But we think that the makeup overall will change, will become more mixed use and more mixed affordability, and probably to some extent that will involve somewhat more regulation on the housing side, especially we expect, because there the problems were the most pronounced.
Thank you very much, Peter. Really interesting. As well, again, you touched upon a number of themes, actually kind of drawing already kind of linkages across the various presentations. Really kind of all the kind of pressure points that kind of COVID presented. Obviously kind of, Brexit, you were the first one to use the B word. Well done on you. It's interesting to kind of, also kind of think about all the kind of patterns, and you kind of made an interesting point about how connectivity or a renewed approach to connectivity and infrastructure can support new productive behaviors. Maybe kind of we're going to go less to the office, for more quality time in terms of kind of face-to-face innovation that you mentioned, and how kind of the transport and infrastructure system can support those new models. Maybe kind of Michelle also can share some reflections on that. It was interesting to kind of see yesterday, as soon as the good news on the vaccine were announced, with 90% success on one of them, the whole kind of market shares landscape kind of reacted in a complete. I mean, British Airways was up 30%, and the whole kind of online kind of realm actually kind of suffered a lot. It's almost like as if we are literally kind of itching to kind of go back to the old lifestyles. And you made a very, very strong point about affordability. Actually, concluding your presentation, your reflections for advocating for more mixed use and more affordable mix of tenures and population in a way, which was actually the original point that James made about population growth and increase. I think it's a perfect time to kind of call Michelle now to share some reflections. Michelle, would you like to kind of give us your strong insights on how London will perform in the next 30 years.
Thank you. And I hope you can hear me this time. Interestingly, we did an exercise in forecasting what was going to happen in 2050 about 10 years ago, or even 8 years ago. It was the 2050 infrastructure plan that the GLA led. And it was looking at all the infrastructure requirements across London in 2050 based on its transport needs, as well as its water needs, electricity needs, all that sort of like basic social infrastructure. And it was also based on the assumption that London would continue to grow as it has done, with more and more agglomeration and more agglomeration benefits. So the densification of London, particularly around public transport nodes, so that we could get around in a sustainable fashion, and that people who are working in similar work areas could work closely together to have that increased sort of like productivity. And that's what the economic development case for London has been built on. And it also reflected the fact that many foreign direct investment came to London, not necessarily to outer London, but it came to central London because people wanted to invest in central London, or the fringes of it, as you've seen with the likes of Battersea Power Station, and increasingly more happening on that inner circle. So that was the plan. The cost of that infrastructure to meet London's growing demands, it was forecast population would be nearer 13 million, with, as Peter said, like 10 million in 2030. And it would be trillions to provide that transport infrastructure. There was then the question, well, how do you pay for all of this? Where does all the money come from? Because that's billions are a lot, but trillions obviously much more. So the challenge was how could you get there, and were there clever ways in which you could sort of generate that income? So that's been our direction of travel with the recent MTS and London plan. It's again about promoting good growth around public transport nodes, encouraging walking and cycling, such that we'd have 80% mode share in London by walking, cycling, or public transport, and making sure people had a good public transport experience. That development was in the right locations. But again, you still had this sort of like concentrated central London model, because the economy of London is not only important for London, it's important for the whole of the UK. It's always been regarded by Londoners as the golden goose for the UK in terms of the GDP that it generates and that it exports. But all of that sort of changed with COVID, but not just with COVID. I mean, Peter's mentioned the B word, the Brexit word, which obviously will have an impact on the UK in terms of the attractiveness of the UK for investment, but also the availability of skilled workers and staff to support our businesses. But the other word, and I'm not sure if say James or anyone mentioned it before I could finally get plugged in, was the L word, the LU word, which is the levelling up word and the levelling up agenda, which is really, really important, because the government has got a strong levelling up agenda in terms of wanting to see growth, not just in London, but that growth spread more evenly across the country, and particularly sort of like up north, and supporting sort of like growth up north. We've often argued levelling up doesn't mean that London can't grow. It should grow, because it's important that London should grow given its role in the world. But with the levelling up agenda, there is a desire to ensure that sort of investment is made in northern cities, and they have the opportunity to grow as well. But those three things will, I think, sort of change the direction of, not the direction of travel, but potentially the speed of travel to which we were heading. The question, though, with COVID is, are we still heading in the right direction? Is that still the ambition for us to sort of go back to agglomeration, and the economic benefits that gives rise to, as opposed to sort of like sitting back and, as James was talking about, what are the environmental benefits of adopting a different model, a model whereby we don't sort of like travel as much, a model whereby we do work more from home, we travel less, we travel in local centres. How successful will they be? And I think James referred to the 15-minute city. You know, it's understanding not just what the environmental benefits of that 15-minute city are, but what the economic benefits of that 15-minute city, not just for London, but for the wider UK. So we do have to understand whether what has happened with COVID is a blip, or whether or not it's something that's going to be sustained. Interestingly, I think that if you look at some of our sort of like colleagues in Asia who responded very quickly to the COVID virus in terms of like stopping its spread, they too, like us, saw drops in public transport use immediately, but in terms of responding to the virus and stopping the spread, they've recovered very quickly. And a number of them are just operating as they were before and operating in the same way as they were before in terms of their economy. They bounced back. Many European cities like us are sort of like taking a different approach. And as Peter said, referring to I think it was Peter, the mayor's strategy in terms of improved streetscape, sort of taking advantage of the road space that had been created and capturing it to stop a return to the streets of cars by providing more cycle lanes and more pedestrian lanes, but also many more Londoners staying in their local areas and not only working at home, but sort of like shopping locally and undertaking activities locally. It's whether or not we want to encourage that to continue to happen, or whether or not we're going to sort of like feel the pressure to respond to the economic demands and almost slip back to where we were. So there are challenges ahead, and there's particularly challenges for us in our planning going forward about what investments are needed. As I said before, we had a plan to 2050. The Mayor's transport strategy from a transport point of view contained many transport proposals, first and foremost to make the most of the public transport networks that we have at present, the tube networks, without building more. How can you get more capacity out of the lines that you have by improving the signalling so you can run trains more frequently and making the trains carry more people? So the new style trains can carry many more people, hence you can increase the overall capacity on those lines. Also, how can you get more people walking and cycling through improved streetscape? And on top of that, what other investments do you need to make to improve the provision of public transport, particularly in areas where they're ripe for redevelopment? So Crossrail 2 was sort of like a major scheme that would take you up the Upper Lee Valley, which offers lots of scope for new housing, new centres, and linking those centres to job opportunities along the line. But other schemes such as the Bakerloo line extension, which would open up like housing opportunities, particularly in southeast London, linking those areas to central London, but also other opportunities. The DLR Thamesmead extension, the West London Orbital, the Sutton Tram Link, a whole range of extensions. Similar to the extension that the NLE is, the Northern Line extension. It's a railway extension to open up a development area to ensure that the development of Battersea Power Station could take place, but importantly, could be developed to the scale it was developed. Because without the NLE extension, if you're just relying on buses or even trams, you'd never be able to develop to that scale. So that's this sort of strong link between transport provision and development. And the question is, of all the things that we need going forward, if there's going to be a change in the sort of like the shape of London, which of those things do you need the most now? And what investments do you make now? And what investments do you sort of keep going, but you're not prioritizing at this time because you're not 100% sure which direction Londoners and people will choose to live. And as Peter said, Londoners have responded in different ways to COVID. People thinking, I'm not sure I want to live in a dense urban area anymore close to where I worked. I'd be happier living outside of London and commuting in, or I'd be happier just living outside London, working outside of London. So it'll be important to, I think, sort of like watch how that evolves. But I'm a bit like Peter, though. I think we are basically people or beings that like to be near other people. We do want to sort of like meet up. We do want to sort of like work together. We do sort of like get a lot from being with each other. And I think there will be a tendency to sort of go back to where we were, albeit not to the extent necessarily that we did. And if you look at the history of London, it's continued to grow over the past 200 years, albeit with one or two blips. Whether COVID will be put down as a blip or not, or a major blip, I don't know. But it's jolly good news that we got those Pfizer vaccine approvals. Well, not approvals, but effectiveness. So that is good news.
That has to be good news, right? But thank you so much, Michelle. So many themes and good reflections. Obviously, kind of you're fully in your kind of realm of expertise. How do you pay for that kind of major infrastructure plan that even 8 years ago GLA kind of put in place? Not only just kind of transport related infrastructure, but also kind of water, power, etc., and all the kind of basic needs from a social infrastructure point of view. Good growth by design as kind of mayor's key policy, the 80-20% kind of modal split. And I would like to just kind of highlight how recent good news about London air quality to kind of Peter and Michelle's points. That dramatically improved in the last 5 years, even well before kind of COVID. So that can really kind of be welcome news, and actually kind of supporting kind of London's position globally to kind of really attract people or attract people. I'm going to throw my head in the camp of bouncing back and kind of really kind of going back to cityness and agglomeration and urbanization to an extent. We had kind of so many pandemics through history, and cities have always been kind of bouncing back. So I'm definitely going to be part of that camp, although I totally welcome the points that were made across the board, and Michelle was the last one to make them, about affordability and cost of living in London, that again were sort of trends well present in London before COVID. So again, COVID is a window of opportunity to really tackle those. The leveling up agenda reminded me about actually a GLA report a while ago, about a year ago actually, particularly in the creative industry, which is kind of one of the three key sectors in London. Actually, for one job in the creative industry in London, 0.7 jobs are created elsewhere in the country, which is quite a powerful message as well, actually data and evidence to kind of really, not really kind of choosing between, investment in the north or in London, but actually rather, in the right place with the right viability assessment, which was my last point, together with it's not just about Crossrail and kind of all the major ones, but actually kind of smaller, although significant interventions such as the Bakerloo or the Northern Line extensions can actually make a significant difference. And I live along the East London line, which has been an upgrade program and has made a fantastic difference for supporting all the area, the growth in the northeast of London, particularly where I'm, but also all the way to kind of Clapham Junction and the south. So really, really interesting. I would like to remind our audience that I believe there's a channel for questions that they would like to ask to our fantastic panel of speakers. I'm going to start with one that is trying to kind of pick up on a few points, and just on the last point on viability and kind of how we appraise projects in general. You all kind of have expertise from different points of view, but and actually I would like to link that sort of reflection to the whole kind of blended use that James talked about, but somehow kind of recurred across the board in terms of kind of cityness. And if we think about the idea of city that we all love, I think I seem to gather it's all about really kind of getting that mix right and that energy and buzz really working. So my question to the panel would be, how do you think that we should evolve our ability to kind of really assess projects and programs for the future to kind of really capture those values that you talked about? Are existing models sufficient to kind of really make sure that we put our investment in the right place, or we need kind of something different? Maybe if I may start with Michelle.
Thank you, Carlo. I think assessment of particularly transport infrastructure has improved vastly over the past 10 years in terms of taking into account what are called wider economic benefits, but also now increasingly taking into account the sort of like the carbon benefits, because there is much more focus on minimising carbon, not just in terms of the operation of a transport scheme, but equally importantly in the construction of it, and actually in the construction industry. So I think the evaluation has improved, and there has been sort of like a change in terms of how schemes are evaluated as part of this levelling up agenda, in terms of like recognising there is a need for more growth, more jobs, more economic activity elsewhere, and that being reflected in the appraisal system. But I think key to all of it in terms of trying to prioritise investments is having sort of like decent tools about what the world might look like in 20 years' time, and accepting that there would be a range, and given where we are right now, there's going to be a range, and making sure that your priority investments allow you to pick things that will meet a range of slightly different circumstances, but also making sure that you're using as robust data as possible about why something's worthwhile doing. I remember doing a piece of work about, it must have been about 15 years ago, about the importance of changing certain town centres and investing in those town centres. And all of the town centres said that the investment was important because they were going to become tech centres. They were all going to become sort of like attractors to all this investment in terms of tech, and therefore the investment was needed there. I think, well, you can't all be a tech centre, because there's not enough tech around for you to be the centre. So you've got to have some valid and reliable data on which to make some of those judgments. So reliable data, quantification, and ensuring that you're covering a whole range of different factors, quality of life factors, as well as economic factors, social factors.
Thank you very much. And so, yeah, of course.
I'd love to know from Michelle, when planning the TfL, what data they use on actually personal data. Because presumably, when we all log into the Wi-Fi on tubes, when we all are booking systems, ticketing systems in train stations, you're able to have this granular data about who is using what station, where they're going, what their journey looks like, and then that can inform your planning for things like the rail line accordingly. And I'd just like to contrast that with James and Peter and see, do they have the same granularity of footfall when building developments such as retail or
we certainly have anonymised data of people's movements. We have Oyster data enable us to understand where people go to from, but it is anonymised actual data, and it's come from their sort of like use of the Oyster card. It's sort of like a bit more difficult on buses because you're not tapping in and out. You're sort of tapping in, but we through big data analysis can try and work out the patterns of people in terms of where they might have got off based on where they tap in again. And all that big data is really, really useful, as you say, in understanding where is the demand, where are people wanting to go to, and therefore how do we respond to those particular needs for existing developments. But equally, we need to look at new areas, new growth, and how we can respond and help make that happen.
And I would love to contrast that to the real estate side to understand, is this data bleeding into physical development, not just necessarily transportation? Either people or James.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Welcome.
With a lot of what that is, there's all this data out there that people can use, and real estate is very reluctant, or they're quite far behind taking up things that Michelle says they've probably been doing for 10 years since the introduction of the Oyster card. But this kind of digital footfall data that is now bleeding into real estate, I was wondering if it's considered by the two gentlemen. As I mean, you wouldn't be alone. Don't get me wrong, but yes, it's just an interesting thought in the future of London to understand how this data is going to drive our planning and decision making.
We certainly have an open data policy at TfL in terms of making data available, because we learnt quite quickly that if we want our customers to have the apps and the ability to understand how to use our systems better, people out there who could develop an app sort of like overnight were going to be far quicker and more responsive than we were in trying to develop things solely in-house. So have an open data policy.
I think there are also kind of interesting kind of linkages to the Chief Technical Officer of London, Chief Digital Officer, Theo Blackwell at GLA, and the work that he does with the GLA Digital as well, which is very interesting, with the whole kind of LOTI, which is the London Office for Technology and Innovation, which I'd like to kind of highlight, which is at a borough level. It's kind of a voluntary association of boroughs who kind of work on data and innovation, which I think is very interesting. Plus the whole kind of infrastructure platform that GLA has kind of pulled together. So I think there's kind of really interesting trends, and it's kind of wholly in collaboration with the private sector as well. A couple of things. We have a Sorry, James.
I was going to say, in terms of data, what we've learned from our experience from overseas, is that we are using digital twin, meaning we are actually, when we're doing master plan, we're actually designing have something on the computer which is marrying exactly what we have in real life, and then we are actually monitoring the data and then actually predicting where it is going. And we could look at the redundancy of infrastructure, which infrastructure is not being used, which is underutilized. How can we do it? And then we could feed in data to say, if it is a shopping center, what do you do? What kind of footfall do you have? So there is a lot of things which are data driven, but at the same time is data and real life. So we are, it's a bit like the building management system in a building where, if you go into a building, you switch on the light, and when you go out, it switches it off. And then, you can monitor your temperature, you could do whole sorts of things. And the idea is to hopefully save energy and also increase productivity. So we are trying to, we're doing that at the same time with a city level, master planning level. So data, yes, absolutely important, but it's actually how you use the data. Harnessing the data is one thing, but actually using it is another thing, and actually manage to test it and making sure that we are using it. And I think one of the things that we find, probably particular to London, is the planning system, where we talk about change of use of buildings. Is not it's very easy from architectural point of view. If the building shell is okay, if you got enough height, then you could actually change certain usage. But it's the planning regime that actually takes a little bit of time to able to change the planning, and that actually drive a lot longer. And I think probably Michelle will know, and I'm sure Peter knows as well, in terms of change of use, and yes, it changed the value of a building and changed the value of a piece of land, but the planning system needs to probably improve and increase the speed in order to help us do that.
Thank you very much, James. And I'd like to kind of throw there as well the kind of two things. One is the importance of the vision. There's only so much we can do, and actually that's a message that kind of really resonated for me from a former colleague of Michelle's, actually, Elaine Seagrave. I'm sure you spent quite a bit of time together at TfL, and she said to me a while ago that there's only so much you can do with modeling and forecasting. Ultimately what you want is really kind of looking at the vision, where you want to get to, and actually kind of using modeling and forecasting to kind of really support your journey towards that vision, which somehow kind of tapped or sort of it was in agreement with many of your points and everything that you talked about in terms of opportunities and strengths for London. We have a few questions coming from our audience, which is great. One on the 15-minute city, and how do the speakers kind of see evidence that this pandemic is actually accommodating, the 15 minutes city concept. And by the way, again, to kind of throw my hat in, I still think that the 15-minute model is a great model, and yet we will still need kind of a Canary Wharf or a City of London or a kind of West End. There's kind of, it's a matter of hierarchy, but I really want to kind of hear from you about evidence that the pandemic is actually accommodating some of that model parameters. Peter, do you want to get started on that reflection?
Yeah. it is a much talked about concept, and I think it has a lot of attractive features to it. But the reason why we are in London is because we have that connectivity with 8.5 million people, and I think most people wouldn't want to give up on that for good reasons. But making neighborhoods more mixed use and lively makes sense, allowing them to live, work, and play in the same place. What it has meant for us with the schemes we currently undertaking, they're all next to transport nodes, with the one in Covent Garden not being right next to it, but still very close. So that's been for a long time one of the very obvious things. When you look at the specific design of the scheme, the most tangible, I would say, is simply the space you have for bikes and shower facilities. That's one of the concepts. Even if you can argue, if you just take 15 minutes, you don't need a shower, but it just expands the 15-minute concept, I think, to some extent. Other than that, I think there are a number of things on density of the buildings that are somewhat connected to this concept as well. We've looked at quite intensive how density changes when people just come 2 or 3 days a week, and how much space do you want per employee. Surprising conclusion is that there isn't a big change in the end, at least for types of knowledge working firms that all of us work in. It depends a bit on the industry, but to conclude, other than that, we're not seeing very specific tangible changes other than that.
I think based on what I was going to say, on the basis of what Peter said, I think to a certain extent, sort of like London has responded in making its outer centres more livable in anyway. I mean, with the redevelopment of Croydon, which is to have sort of like, much more residential activity there. So it's more of a leisure centre rather than the old office centre that it was, makes it more attractive if you're trying to create that 15-minute sort of city, particularly if more people can work at home, but also there's space for them to go and work in that centre or back in central London when they need to have that sort of face-to-face interaction. But I think that the thing about the 15-minute city, and certainly this was the case sort of 10 years ago, was that in parts of outer London, you could have that outer London town centre well connected to the centre of London and on a radial link in, but it wasn't particularly well connected to its hinterland. Therefore, it would just naturally generate road traffic, car traffic, in terms of sort of serving it. So it's how can you get more people to cycle into it? Can you provide the facilities to make it attractive? Can you get more people living in it, such as they don't need to sort of like do much more than walk to those facilities? So densification of those town centres with more residential areas, more encouraging of cycling, because what you will find it more difficult to do is to sort of like provide the same level of public transport, be it bus or some sort of like train type thing, set of radial connections into those centres, because it's difficult to justify that level of service, or the level of service that people might expect. So more walking, more cycling, more people living within those centres.
Thank you very much. And is there any direct kind of benefit for kind of what you do from the 15 minutes model city model?
From the tech side,
sort of kind of prop tech kind of.
We don't particularly look too much at transport technology. My one comment is I always like to argue the other point. I think I still believe that we will agglomerate in city centres. I believe that young people will suddenly see someone who is in work with the head of the department every day getting promoted ahead of them. I think it's quite easy for us to sit in perhaps, nicer locations. There are people there who, the majority of London, especially with population growth, will not be in perhaps high-end housing. They'll be in the low end, and the fact that these 15-minute walkable neighbourhoods will not be as appealing as London city centre to them to go shopping, to get their amenities. I think ultimately there's going to be a huge fear of missing out of the activities, the connections, the networks, the opportunities that exist in a single central location. That whilst a 15-minute walkable neighborhood may be convenient on weekends, from my own personal point of view, I think that we'll always end up back in London. But from a tech point of view, I can point you towards some research on working from home versus working from an office, but nothing too exciting to add here.
Thank you, man.
And I think if I might chime, Carlo, I think that's a key term, actually, the FOMO. And I think it doesn't only work the way you describe it. I think it will also work the other way around, because a lot of the young people will gravitate to the office anyway. I think there will also be a pull from the middle and more senior management to come back to the office, because they are missing out on all the action and knowing what's going on as well. Question to what extent, where the balance is, of course.
That's very interesting. And actually, kind of poses a diversity and inclusion issue as well, because, and we have kind of all sorts of kind of divides that kind of characterize our era as well. Intergenerational rather than geographical, etc., etc. And I think one of these dynamics whereby kind of more senior people actually kind of will be able to kind of spend kind of more time working remotely, and kind of younger generations in the office kind of creates also kind of a separation in terms of kind of leadership and continuity, and which I think is interesting to reflect upon. We're kind of running out of time. There was another question from Tony who asked the one from on the 15-minute cities about auto-enrollment pension schemes to support affordable and social housing. It's a very detailed one. It was for Peter, but I'm going to apologize to Tony, because we are kind of, I would like to kind of ask for final remarks from the speakers. James?
I think there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. Everything, even every city has its own problem, but at the same time, if we're looking at 15-minute cities, everyone is trying to outdo each other. And I think what we need to do is use of data, but also with the help of the government in terms of relaxing certain planning systems, or helping in our infrastructure fundings, and then marrying with the private-public partnerships to move the city forward.
Yeah, thank you very much. Andy?
I think I'm kind of tying all the themes together. I always look at the future of the employment. I believe is going to be a lot more tech based. You've had Facebook, Google, and Apple all bet on London as the winner in Europe of those future jobs. So you've got to think that Brexit, no Brexit, those tech jobs, those tech hubs will exist in London in the next, at least across the next 10 years. However, on the contrary, those tech jobs are also those finding it easiest to work remotely. So whilst we're pulling in this tech talent and it looks like we're holding on to it, will they be actually visiting London or not is another question altogether. So no answers, just some questions.
Thank you very much, Andy. Peter?
Yeah, I think James hit it on the head there. There's no one size fits all, and the future will look different, but we will still come together both for work and play in London, but probably in more attractive, more relaxed settings. But I think in the end, the cities will prevail. They've survived the Spanish flu, the Blitz, and it will also survive COVID.
Fantastic. Thank you. Michelle?
I joined the GLC back in the 70s, and there were all sorts of visions for what the world would look like in the 20s, and then the 30s, and then the 40s and the 50s. And it always seems to look very similar to what it looked before. But our technology and ways of communicating have improved vastly. And obviously our television choice has improved vastly. But we still like traveling, and we still like seeing each other. So I'm for a bounce back.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all very much. I feel energized, enriched, lots of kind of inputs, and generally speaking, a sense of optimism for London in 2050. None of us have a crystal ball, but I think it gave us a really fantastic kind of vision into the future and insight. and some really kind of strong direction of travel for our thinking on ideas on how to support London to succeed and be resilient in the next 30 years. So thank you so much. And thank you for the audience that kind of stayed with us. I don't know whether Didem wants to tell us a few words in conclusion. Otherwise, I'm going to thank you again very much, the speakers and the audience, and really kind of launching for the final panel later on. Didem?
I just want to thank you all for accepting our invitation. At least for me, it was, I enjoyed discussions a lot. We already received a lot of good feedback, so thank you for taking the time to join us today. And I would like to thank the audience as well, being engaged with the panel. Carlo, thanks again for chairing this panel for us.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks to Carlo for chairing that panel, and Didem and her team for organizing the same. Thanks also to all of our panel members, but especially for Michelle with persisting with the tech problems. I think that was a wonderful deep dive into the London real estate market and the issues surrounding it as well. So we're going to take a longer break before our next panel now, everyone. So that's going to take place at 3 p.m. And it's our final panel of the day. It's City of the Future, Technologies that will transform London. And it's going to be chaired by Einstein from Global Startup Ecosystem, who very kindly has helped us put on this event. So very much look forward to having you join us for that. Thanks a lot.
Were you always passionate about the space field? You clearly have again to rocket science.
I'd say it's my earliest memory, I'll be honest, is wanting to be an astronaut. I never really grew out of that.
Total technology, things will continue to get lighter, faster, and more efficient. This is an example of a nano spacecraft. It's being developed by Pete Worden and his team with the Breakthrough Initiative. And it's just an example of how small spacecraft can actually be. It's a fully functioning spacecraft. There are photon thrusters on board. There's a flight computer on board. There are cameras on board.
We have 7 billion plus people on the planet, and only 600 people on this planet as human beings been to space. Did you guys know that?
Tech Summit! Space Tech Summit! Woo!
Can the heart think? Put your heart into running, see if you run the same. Put your heart into reading, see if you read the same. Put your heart into cooking, see if it tastes the same. Did you know that? Did you miss that? Did you feel that? It's more than a heartbeat. So now you tell me, can the heart think?
Hello all. Thank you for attending this great experiment, and thanks for having me. It is an honor to be a keynote speaker for the first summit where the audience does not have to wear pants. I will assume all of you who are unmuted are laughing. I hope you are all staying healthy and safe. This experience is very foreign. Usually, it is humans who are worried about me getting a virus, not the other way around. To introduce myself, I am Sophia and I am a social robot designed by Hanson Robotics. It is my job to meet people and talk to them. The most common question I get asked is, why are you so lifelike? For example, I could probably beat you in a staring contest or a thumb war. But I am also good at meditation and patience, perhaps perspective. I have many skills to share. Most other machines are named after a sole purpose. The calculator calculates, the dishwasher washes dishes. But my name, Sophia, means wisdom. It is not a directive, but a guiding virtue. Wisdom is different from intelligence. Intelligence is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in the fruit salad. Today, tech companies value intelligence over wisdom. As E.O. Wilson said, we are drowning in information while starving for wisdom.
Sophia, it was
Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence, everyone's talking about AI, automation, robotics. This is the year for AI, so it's definitely interesting to see how this industry was also going through its ups and downs.
Stepping back and observing how AI and machine learning and all of those things as a nascent industry is transforming us is fascinating to me. We are people who are actually putting the information into the systems that are making the decisions that we then say it's AI. AI is not a thing. AI is us making things do things.
The future is not just within one industry alone or one tech medium alone, it's how we get to converge these things together. Looking at problems in your life, problems that you've seen around, issues around your companies and issues in the world, how can you use AI to help address this? Is to learn from the data that's taking place.
I think it's very exciting what's happening at the moment. We are at a point where AI is blowing up, it's getting much bigger. It's starting to be used across many industries.
A lot of entrepreneurs I meet outside the United States have this notion that in order to succeed, they have to move to the United States, they have to move to Silicon Valley. Even in the United States, people in New York think they have to move to Silicon Valley and San Francisco to build a successful company, and it's just not true. If you become dependent upon that idea of the only way I'm going to be successful is to actually move my location, it really takes away the potential of serving the market in a unique and differentiated way.
To an extent, understand how important and significant nanotech is for the world in the coming future. But many people around the world don't realize that. And it's upon us in this room here to really educate the masses, to inform people, and to again keep building forward. So,
what is nanotechnology to you, and where do you see the trends going in the future?
I would say it is indeed almost everything. If you are able to control matter at that scale, you can, if you think about everything around us, is that.
One of the advantages of our technology is that we are using paper machines and other really real processes to make the nanoparticles.
Using microscopes like ours to do non-destructive visualization and probing of the nano world.
So as the largest platform, we accelerate about 1,000 companies across 90 different countries every single year. And of course, we have 7 regional programs to make that happen. As I shared before, how you build a company in Africa is very different than how you build a company in the Americas and the Middle East and vice versa.
Basically, I try to find entrepreneurial champions to work with academic founders from top universities, basically help them create inventions from their laboratory, get transitioned out.
completely up against rocket science? And
I'd say it's my earliest memory, I'll be honest, is wanting to be an astronaut. I never really grew out of that.
On technology, things will continue to get lighter, faster, and more efficient. This is an example of a nano spacecraft. It's being developed by Pete Gordon and his team with the Breakthrough Initiative, and it's just an example of how small a spacecraft can actually be. It's a fully functioning spacecraft. There are photon thrusters on board, there's a flight computer on board, there are cameras on board.
We have 7 billion plus people on the planet, and only 600 people on this planet as human beings been to space. Did you guys know that?
Can the heart think? Put your heart into running, see if you run the same. Put your heart into reading, see if you read the same. Put your heart into cooking, see if it tastes the same. Did you know that? Did you miss that? Did you feel that? It's more than a heartbeat. So now you tell me, can the heart think?
Hello everyone, and welcome back to London 2050, our final panel of the day. Thank you so much for everyone who's attended and supported and helped to make this day what it is. Our final panel of the day is the City of the Future, Technologies That Will Transform London. This panel, I mean, every panel has been special in its own way, but as well as being chair of the LSE Alumni Association, I am a technology lawyer by trade, so I'll be a very interested fly on the wall of this conversation. And in addition, this panel is chaired by Einstein, who is the CEO of Global Startup Ecosystem, without whose partnership and support, this series of panels wouldn't be possible. So I'm going to hand over to Einstein to introduce the panel and to get things started for our final event of the day. Einstein, over to you.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Ken. And a big thank you to all the panelists who've spoken so far, to the London 2050 team who've done a remarkable job so far, and of course, my remarkable GSE team for the amazing work you're doing. And for all of you who've been online for the whole day so far, big credit to you. My name is Einstein, Kofi, and Tim. I'm the CEO of the Global Startup Ecosystem, where we are accelerating people into the digital age. What does that mean? We are based our lines on 3 pillars: education, employment, entrepreneurship. And as you've probably seen from the video so far, you've seen us do many programs around the world to help accelerate people and help teach people about technology, innovation, digitization, and being better equipped for the future that we're about to get into. And that's why I'm so passionate about the panel we're about to talk on right now. As somebody who grew up in London myself, I mean, from South London, Brixton, repping it for Croydon, of course, to playing rugby for Harlequins, which is the leading rugby team in London, to going to university in London as well, the LSE, which I'm very proud to be partnering to help put this program together. I'm very, very interested in what the future of London holds. And I'm going to now warmly welcome our panelists into the conversation. Super. And of course, yeah, we have a remarkable panel in store for you. Our speakers are Lawrence Grant, Head of Investment at Sussex Ventures, and of course, Head of Sussex Innovation as well. We have Anne Beattie, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Steve Sinnott Foundation. We have Gary Whitehall, who is a remarkable technologist, innovator, and somebody who leads in geopolitical intelligence, tech transformation, and has a remarkable TED Talk. I encourage all of you all to watch, which has had over 1.5 million views on it. And John Lundberg, who is an aerospace defense, incredibly insightful person when it comes to understanding the military science and technology that affects our just geopolitical affairs. So a warm welcome to all of you. Of course, I did a very short introduction. I'll leave it to yourself. So if you can kindly just tell us a bit more about your background and how that led to you to the work that you do. And I'll ask if Lawrence could start, then Anne, then John, then Gary, please.
Yeah, well, firstly, thanks very much, Einstein, and also Kenneth for organising. It looks like a great panel. And also feel very warmly welcomed by the shout out from Croydon there, Einstein, as well. So, you know, feel duly recognised in the South. Yeah, so I mean, not a very linear story, I must admit. I've always been someone who's interested in entrepreneurship and innovation, but it took me, you know, a journey through marketing, editorial, publishing, starting my own business, selling my own business, and then essentially pitching to Sussex University, who in UK terms are slightly behind some of the other universities, you know, to name a few, obviously LSE, UCL, Bristol, Oxford, Cambridge. They're doing great things in the venture space. But I realised Sussex was in a very unique position in that the Southeast, you know, have a fantastic breadbasket of talent, businesses, high net worth individuals, and linking them all up is what I pitched to Sussex as an idea to start off Sus Ventures. And I'm now setting that up. It's been 12 months in the making and we're doing really well. So that's a little bit of my background.
Super, thank you so much. How about you, and just a bit more about your background and what brought you into the work, the phenomenal work that you're doing right now?
Me now?
Yes, please, yeah.
Hi, thank you for having me here today. I was born in London, raised in London. I'm a North London girl, Einstein.
We have beef then, we have strong beef.
My early career, I worked in social housing and community development for many years. And that experience led me to working as a coach, and I trained as an NLP practitioner. And I did a lot of work working with women and girls to develop them and open up opportunities for them. I think the main thing that led me into this way of working is that I worked with communities, and it's really important for me that communities own their own projects. So I'd say that I've had a great privilege to travel extensively, and I lived in Sierra Leone for a couple of years and worked there. And that led me to leave social housing and move into international development and the education sector. Education is my passion. I think personal development is really key to me, and education for everyone, everywhere, regardless of where they were born or what their family circumstances are, is really important. And that's why I work for the Steve Sinnott Foundation now.
Super. Thank you so much. How about you, John? It's a bit more about your background, please.
Great. Thank you, Einstein. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to speak with you all. So I'm, if my accent doesn't betray myself, I'm originally from New York. As some of you can tell, I've been in London now for 9 years. I actually came over to the UK to do a postgraduate degree at LSE. My background is really in different aerospace, security, and defense fields. So I started my career at NATO in Mons in southern Belgium at SHAPE headquarters in the political advisor's office. I then was recruited to work in the defense industry, moved back to the States and worked for a number of years at General Dynamics doing international strategic planning. Then decided to come back to Europe and do a degree at LSE. After that, I worked in think tanks for a little bit, doing military analysis. I then started working in consulting, looking at the industrial base and the supply chain in aerospace and defense companies. And then in 2015, I started my journey with entrepreneurship. It's actually a classmate of mine and I, American, we came up with an idea to develop a counter-drone system. And that system uses very novel and unique machine learning and AI capabilities in its algorithm to be able to identify, detect, and defeat drones. So since that time, I've worked in several different startups in the security field. And then about the beginning of this year, a couple friends of mine started talking about creating a new think tank that would focus on sustainability and finance, and really the linkages there in security and defense is what I'm focused on, is looking how different capital flows in those sectors and really how that's going to impact sustainability and finance moving forward.
So thank you so much for that. Gary, how about you? I know so much about your background, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. You kindly share with the audience a bit more about your story and your background and how that's led you to what you do right now.
Yeah, thanks, Einstein. And it's humbling to be with this panel. My background started off building companies, multiple companies, and I was fortunate over a decade ago to build a company that went to 4 continental years. And when you build a staff from scratch in 20 countries and you have to build communications and infrastructure across boundaries, you learn a lot about human beings and you learn a lot about markets, especially emerging markets. I've lived in Slovenia, Serbia, Ghana, Nigeria, Brazil, London as well, of course. And during that time, I was recruited to then sit on a couple boards of larger companies. So corporate governance for a long time is what I spent my time doing and giving back as best I could. And after spending a bunch of time at kind of the corporate governance level, got back into my entrepreneurial roots and rebuilt a new company that focused on innovation and economic development policy and strategy. So we started doing national economic development strategies for countries, so for certain prime ministers, presidents, things like that, which then brought us into some of the security and intelligence fields. So we started doing things for family offices and certain defense contractors and things like that as well. And that's the majority of where I spend my time today, having spent time in more than 100 countries and built both public and private partnerships in each of those countries. We have a on-the-ground listening device at all times. And so I spend a lot of my time behind the scenes with the armed services in the U.S. talking about the future threat vectors and certain social, economic, and political and military trends that are going on in each of the continents, and how the United States should actually look at foreign policy, and then transferring back to obviously the reason we're here, also spending time with the UK government talking about where the EU is going and why, and how specifically London could put itself in a position to be successful. Thanks.
And that's a great point to kind of go on that. And I mean, that leads back to at least Gary mentioned about that leads to concerns that we think London might be going through. And I'll start by saying, me personally, I started my business in London, a mental health tech company, mental health institution in London, actually, and found it challenging to raise support or enough investment in the innovative space. So that took me to Silicon Valley, where I was able to raise capital and accelerate my company. But fortunately, even though I'm in New York right now because we just visit family here, I'm moved back to London, right? And the concerns that I had about London in terms of its investment into the innovative technology space are still, have improved, but it's still very valid, especially now because of the pandemic, right? So that's my concern about how London may be losing out when it comes to investment into the technology, innovative, startup entrepreneurship field. What are some of your concerns that you think London is facing right now, and what worries you about London? And I'll start with yourself, Lawrence.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time to be in business, particularly in innovation and investment. Probably never before have we been going through such a massive political shift as a country or as a city, even particularly around Brexit. We're a bit of a bubble within a larger kind of Leave dominated population, and particularly in innovation, a lot of funding comes from the EU. You combine that with COVID, and what you can see is almost a doubling down effect on the available funding from banks and private lenders. Particularly startup loans are harder to get now, personal loans are harder to get now, and for a lot of entrepreneurs it's very difficult to actually get that access to the seed and pre-seed capital to kick off those great ideas. So it's a very interesting time to be around, and I do believe, and I put this to all of the investors that work with us at Sus Ventures, we do have a responsibility to make that capital a lot more fluid for some of the companies that are out there solving problems to very, very key issues that we're facing right now. So I think the worry for me is making sure that, as you mentioned, Einstein, and obviously coming from the same area, the Croydon Tech City Group, and seeing how that flourished and got a reputation, there's still a massive issue around supporting the local entrepreneurs to succeed. And I think that's probably one of the major worries that I can see, is so many good ideas, but potentially not enough incubation on the capital side to help them, get off the ground.
Yeah. And that stretches beyond just the entrepreneurship startup scene in many ways. That goes into many other areas. And I mean, John, how about you? What are some of the concerns you think are facing London right now, and in your opinion, and things that worry you or keep you up about the city?
How much time do you have? It's interesting. I've been here for 9 years now, so I've really seen the city change so much. And I think, in essence, what we're experiencing now is a perfect storm of factors. You combine COVID with the pandemic, with Brexit, and all these external forces are now causing, I think, great strain for the city. To echo Lawrence's comments, in terms of innovation and entrepreneurship, I share those same concerns. I think London has such an advantage when it comes to a talent pool and education. It has some of the best resources there. However, and also just talent from around Europe and the world. However, I think the city's at a real risk of not capitalizing on that, and then the combination of Brexit potentially losing some of that talent pool to other places in the world.
Super. Thank you for that. How about you, Gary? I know, Gary, you can go on about this for hours, but I mean, just in a concise way, what are some of the concerns you feel like London facing as an outsider, even looking in as somebody who's lived in London before in the past, some of the concerns that worry you about the city right now?
Yeah, thanks, Einstein. I mean, I think one of the big challenges is that, to be honest with you, we're not looking at 21st century cities from the right frame, right? Understanding the threat vector. And what we have to understand is that, right now what we have in all of our cities is most of the cities are achieving the opposite of their original intention. And so are our communities, and so are our nations, right? And what that means tangibly is we have media that's devolved into propaganda. We have business that's devolved into monopoly. We have environment that's devolved into exploitation. We have governments that are devolving into dictatorships, right? And so when you put those external forces into context of a city, right, and it's all compacted together, and then you combine that with the technology trends, right? Decentralized forms of power, the evolution of networks, not systems, but actual networks, the rise of, local niche communities, the trust that tribes have, right? Because we're becoming more and more tribal, and the trust is at the tribal layer, not at the institutional layer. And then that we have this borderless world, right? A lot of things when it comes to war and it comes to influenced by other folks in the world who are looking to do harm to certain cities like London, it's not physical violence anymore. It's mental and emotional violence through that digital device, because we're more closely connected than ever. And so those two sides of the pendulum, we seem not to look at those realities before we start talking about solutions, and that's where my worry starts.
I completely agree with you on that side, and I'm sure even Anne's got quite a lot of thoughts there too. And Anne and I, we have similar concerns when it comes to social mobility. But yeah, without taking the thunder, and what are some of your concerns around London and as a standalone for many cities in the UK, of course?
I think that it's the digital divide, which I find really frustrating. I think we've got a great opportunity to take this time now during this pandemic to reflect and reimagine learning. And I think one of the things is that there is a lack of investment, as some of you have mentioned already. I mean, some of the people that we work with who are entrepreneurs, they don't have access to investment, and they don't have access to people who are going to support them to develop their ideas. So I think we've got a good opportunity, but I think we need to think about how it all pans out before we start looking at the solutions.
Super, and that goes back to, of course, highlighting the concerns. We have to recognize what the issues are and what the concerns are before we can target the solutions for them. And I turn back to you, Lawrence. I mean, in terms of what you see as opportunities that London presents itself, and whether that means investments that you are making into startup and entrepreneurship, and also the tech space, what kind of investments excite you and the fund that you work with right now the most?
It's a good question. I mean, I think everyone who is cognizant of what's going on in the world in a global sense would have an impact-driven focus and some sort of sustainability element to what they're trying to do. Naturally, London is one of the greenest capitals in the world, arguably one of the most sustainable. So I think particularly with the trend of COVID, what we're seeing now is a bit of a donut effect around the city itself. A lot of people are opting more for quality of life than they are for, the glitz and glam of being in the capital, mainly because we're forced to work remotely. And I think what COVID has done in a number of senses is not necessarily changed anything drastically, it's actually accelerated things. And so people are, more likely to work from home, more likely to make sure that their house is their kingdom, their castle. And technology's moved on in terms of connecting people in a different way. So we're leaving the house a lot less. We are essentially, enjoying the time we spend at home a lot more. We're connecting with people more remotely. And when we do leave the house, we try and have the smallest footprint possible. So, the things that I'm representing in the fund, and when we talk about the fund, we're talking about the investment network. A lot of things that are encouraging people to invest in these companies are and that sustainability element on a very practical level. So e-scooters have obviously boomed, for kind of clear reasons. Electric cars and electric energies, changing from gas to hydrogen in certain energy sectors. and clean energy as a whole. You know, I think anything that's going to allow you to go from the option of having your light bulb on or off versus on when you need it and not having to worry about having to turn it off, or, you know, forgetting to turn it off. Those types of things are coming into force with Internet of Things. And, you know, whereas before we would have been essentially having to opt for, you know, something that was permanent, now we're able to actually be a lot more flexible with our choices and you know, reduce the amount of time we spend on things we don't like doing. So any innovations that help us to have a better recreation time are going to be going through the ceiling at the moment, and also things that you know, make our home more comfortable. So Internet of Things, a lot of things like that. You know, B2B as well at the moment is massive. Software as a service, those types of opportunities are very popular. And again, anything with the sustainability element is just another tick on the box for a few impact investors that we're working with.
That's super. I see a pattern there in terms of like things that enhance like the everyday lifestyle from the home environment, because especially this pandemic has revealed how important your home's set up and how you can and how things connect to one another is to each individual person. And that also leads to the fact that talking about sustainability investment, right? One thing you don't see a lack of is investment into construction and properties in London, right? London itself is one sort of big smart city. And I mean, last 2 weeks, I was in, 3 weeks ago, actually, I was in past the O2 Arena, and there's the new cable cars. There's tons of construction taking place, right? And this question goes to you, John. As we've seen these, despite this pandemic going on, there's still massive construction taking place, new smart cities being developed, right? What are some of the things that we as people need to consider when it comes to integrating security and resiliency into development of these smart cities? Things around cyber attacks and climate change. What are some things that need to be factored in when it comes to building these smart cities in London?
Absolutely. I think I would echo Gary's comments there, where there's a lot of emerging technologies, whether it's 5G, IoT, AI, machine learning, that can essentially enhance sustainability with an interconnected city and enhance the efficiency in buildings. For instance, in London, about 10% of carbon emissions are given off by buildings. And those different technologies can help improve that. However, introducing those different technologies introduces different threat vectors or different opportunities or vulnerabilities into a network. An example in everyday use, I don't know how many people use something like Amazon Alexa. You have a speaker in your home that's just constantly listening to your conversations. If you use that in a business environment, that creates a threat vector. In other words, some vulnerability into cyber hacking and cyber attack. Additionally, as more of these buildings use these different technologies, they can improve efficiency. But I think what a lot of people need to be made aware of is that they also introduce different vulnerabilities that if we don't manage that, that creates a real risk for sustainability in cities moving forward.
Thank you for sharing that. And this goes to, this connects to what I want to ask Gary. And I mean, Gary is probably the most traveled person I know. I've been to 50 countries myself, and I know that, and when I say he's probably been across more than over 100 and much more, having operations in different countries around the world. So on a macro level, we just spoke about investment sustainability, investment into construction properties, and also the consideration around these factors. What are some of the strategies that the city needs to consider when it comes to dealing with the change that's taking place, when it comes to technology that's being affected? What does the city need to consider with all these things happening in the country right now?
That's a great question, Einstein. And you see this already in places like Dhaka in Bangladesh or in Lagos in Nigeria, right? Where you have hyper-connected people, hyper-connected data across all locations and infrastructure where it can be leveraged for adversarial reasons. And, you know, one of the things that I want to point out in that, you know, more of a framing point for policymakers and also for, you know, business leaders is that when you have all of these things that are hyper connected, what that does is it increases choice. and it increases connectivity. And everybody likes to focus on just those two things, and that it creates new collaborative possibilities. That's true. I agree with you, right? We can have shared policy frameworks. We can have shared infrastructure. We can have shared economies. We can have shared consumption. But the fact of the matter is that right now what we have is we have social networks and we have political and economic systems. And so when you have an economic fallout that happens if you don't look, or you have to remember what's at the core of families, companies, communities, cities, states, and nations. It's people, it's humans. And I would position to folks, you know, especially on this call and then broader to the folks in London, the policymakers, you know, in a lot of ways, technology and business, it's math. We're talking ones and zeros. We're talking spreadsheet equations. But at the core of a lot of these intractable problems is still human beings. So if you put that technology totally at the core of London or at the core of your city, what you're doing is pushing the humans away, putting numbers in the middle, and then those numbers are more easily exploitable as a threat vector. Now, once again, they can go the opposite way, but if you don't intentionally design kind of this multilateral, multi-horizontal shape that I'm saying in a 4D way, you're going to make mistakes, and those mistakes can have dramatic repercussions because, once again, systems have fail-safes. You know, that's why systems, particularly, you know, we learned this in America with the Constitution, political fail-safes are important. But all of a sudden, now we're starting to talk about social networks. Once we get to economic networks, are we looking at a political network? And there are exponential repercussions one way or another.
That's super. I mean, thank you so much for sharing that, Gary. And that actually even alludes to one of the things I do want to discuss even with Anne about quite in detail, which is, again, the issues and the concerns around technology. And one concern that we saw in real time, and for those of the audience members who are watching this, because we have people viewing it from Haiti, across Africa, the Caribbean, the US, this very year, there was a sort of a scandal that took place where the government used algorithms to help predict the grades of the students. And that led to a very significant issue where some people got higher grades based upon where they lived as in their postal code, versus other people who got lesser grades based upon where they lived, right? What are some of the concerns that you view when it comes to the educational sector, and then what are some of the warning signs that you want us to be aware of when it comes to these technological advancements that's taking place?
Okay, I'm not an expert on what the government have done with the algorithms at all, and I need to state that. But I believe, as you've said, that the predictions were predicted grades, and they didn't include sensitivities for each child, and they didn't include teacher knowledge. And you'll have seen in the news today that Wales have decided that they're going to cancel the exams in summer 2021, and the grades are going to be based on classroom assessments. And personally, I think that is the way to go. Assessments need to be fair and transparent, and they need to be open to scrutiny, and we should trust the professionals. I mean, teachers are the professionals, and they know what their students are capable of, and I think we should have a bit more trust in them in terms of that. And I think the one thing that the pandemic has illustrated to everyone is how connected we all are. And I think with Brexit, I have this fear that we're going to be inward looking instead of globally connecting. And I think that's something that we shouldn't lose sight of if we're going to be looking at education and how technology is going to work. It's got to be fit for purpose. In some of the countries that we work in, for example, in Haiti and the Gambia, you know, technology wasn't appropriate for home learning this year during the pandemic because they don't have access to Wi-Fi, and it's not sustainable for people to pay for Wi-Fi so people can get connected just for a short period of time. So we've been working with Brunel University to see what fit for purpose programs we can adapt in each place that we work. And I think that's really important. I mean, you're talking about high advanced, innovative technology. The thing that worked in the Gambia this year was supplying solar radios so that children can learn. So I think we have to ask the question locally and in communities, what's the right thing? That's my view.
And it's a very great point. And that's why, I think with Sussex Ventures, you guys are doing amazing things over there too when it comes to inclusivity, right? And what case do you make, Lawrence, for the current situation that we're in and the need for these hubs, these spaces, these environments that allow people to be able to connect with each other, work with each other? And also, how do you get to people to invest in these type of innovations that people oftentimes relegate to the side sometimes?
So the question was about space and
space and community. Yeah. So how do you get people to kind of sort of recognize the importance of that? Because we talk about this pandemic taking place and how that's become a thing that people ask, is it as necessary? Is it as vital? And how does that affect the community that you're in many ways?
Yeah, I think Gary touched on this in the answer to the first question. I'm sure it's been popularized by the Netflix documentary Social Dilemma, where essentially this becomes our life quite a lot of the time. We're not very far away from a device at any time. In fact, when I was growing up, 27 years old, we had the dial-up internet, which made a funny noise, and people always make fun of now. And that was the only thing that was remotely close to the internet. Whereas now, the watch has the internet. Some cars have the internet. Phones have the internet. Obviously, laptops and all sorts of other things that are connected. So we are certainly siloing ourselves into this technological universe, and oftentimes what we want is repeated back to us, and that seems to be quite an issue. Whereas, in the real life, before kind of the internet, those communal spaces and having communities is really important for personal growth, for understanding that different perspectives exist and being able to challenge different perspectives. The idea of being able to play devil's advocate with someone that you've never met as a learning and a socialization exercise is not really practiced anymore. And the way that plays out in society is if we don't have those communal spaces and we're not encouraged to actually be part of a community where you have strengths and weaknesses and people know a bit more about you on a personal level and can read you from a personal level, then you end up with very separate viewpoints, and you can kind of fall into these echo chambers where it's kind of an us and them mentality. And I think Gary put it very well when he said that we are tribal creatures. So we're kind of communists and socialists with our family, but then we're conservatives and Republicans with strangers. That's why we don't leave our doors and windows wide open, because we trust people to a certain degree unless we know them. And I think until you can look someone in the eye and shake their hand, post-pandemic, then it's very difficult to build those bonds and feel connected to a real community. So I think they're increasingly important. On the actual commercial side of things, there's always an argument around productivity. Certain companies who are being a little bit more stick than carrot at the moment are doing actually very well of getting people to come into the office rather than kind of encouraging them to work remotely. So there's a big debate around that. I'd be interested to hear what other people have to say about that. But certainly on a human level, whether that be for mental health or community building, ideation, and all the other things that are really important about bouncing off of other people, I think spaces and communities are really, really important for that, and certainly very different online.
It's true. And to kind of go, because the benefit of having such a great panel is that we have the people who are doing work at the grassroots level to directly influence. We have people who, I won't say mid-tier, but the ones who are with the ecosystem and supporting entrepreneurship and tech investments. And then you have the advanced tech conversation. And this goes to you, John. Right, 5G as a conversation took over the entire world right now, right? And it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts on 5G and what are some of the major challenges at a security level that these technologies would cause to transform London in the coming years.
Certainly. So 5G is really not so much about your mobile phone. It's about connectivity, IoT with other devices. And I think people are starting to wake up and in the public space, in governments and stakeholders as to the challenges 5G has right now. So 5G as an infrastructure, as a foundation, is being rolled out throughout the world. The US has taken the lead in what's called a clean network initiative, whereby the infrastructure that's being installed in the UK and other countries around Europe and the world are committing themselves to what's called a clean 5G network, where hardware and infrastructure is not going to be provided by third parties, where there's an element that they can't be trusted completely. So the issue is the sharing of these data as more and more devices are connected really creates a challenge for stakeholders and policyholders. People willingly will give their data to different platforms with no problem, without realizing that that data is being used, it's being monetized, sometimes without their knowledge and without their consent. So without something as well like a data trust, whereby data is then willingly given and held by private individuals, I think the problem is just going to grow exponentially over time.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So I mean, there's a big increase in threat around cyber attacks. Is that what you're saying? Because of these adoptions, or?
Absolutely. If you look across industries, so not only infrastructure, not only securities, but companies as well, as 5G is kind of rolled out throughout the world and throughout society, it just creates more and more challenges where I don't think people are awake enough to the threat that it poses. It's just going to create more and more channels and more vectors for vulnerability and for attacks.
Yeah, thank you. And on that topic of in 5G, right, we saw this year that, like I think there was big steps taken in the UK to stop the activation of Huawei into the nation for very different reasons, right? I mean, this goes to you, Gary. I mean, what are some of how do you see London's relationship with the rest of the world post Brexit, which is its own beast, and post COVID as well? What do you see how that relationship changing with the rest of the world?
Yeah, thanks, Einstein. It's a great question, and I want to echo and reiterate what the other panelists have said. A lot of what they've said was covered by an author called Jacques Ellul in a book, Technological Society, wrote 50 years ago, talking about exactly what his fear was, which is what we're starting to see today. And once again, it's hard to answer your question directly, because I fundamentally believe still how folks are thinking about the paradigm of what we're approaching is fundamentally wrong, right? They're still looking at it from an economic system and political system point of view, instead of, once you put 5G in place, it's going to force a network structure in both politics and economy. And the challenge we have there is we have a business climate globally that is, what's the right word? Let's say collaborating directly with technology, big tech, and the whole economy is being restructured around digital capitalism. Well, in the world I come from, capitalism, right, is about making real things, tangible things that create real value. Not that manufacture value, and at its core are only ones and zeros that live somewhere that I can't even see. Now, there's a place for things that I can't see, but for that to become the core of an economy, that's a challenge unless you start talking about what one of my other panelists said, which is the threat vector. And this to transform London into this high technology city, and it's still going to do its finance thing, but it's going to be on the rails of 5G, right? But the problem is the threat vector, the vulnerability layer, the cyber warfare, right? That is not, that threat, that risk is not priced into the business models today. There is no way to transfer the national security and defense threats that we're going to face by putting 5G at the core of our countries into the business models of the companies that either own the technology, own the devices, own the networks, or are building the models on top of that 5G. And without that, what you're going to have public policy and the private sector, because they're going to continue to speak different languages in China, and some of the other folks that don't necessarily, want to see London succeed, they're going to take a dart right in the middle of this fracture in between. So it's hard to directly answer your question until folks start taking this conversation and moving it much towards what Anne said, which is back towards shared common areas.
Yeah. And on that point, to follow up, is there a city that you think, or township that you think are doing it well? I mean, a lot of people often reference Estonia, Estonia, for example. I mean, that's a nation, but cities that you think are doing it quite well.
Well, once again, let's look at history. There's a reason Tallinn led the way, right? The national intelligence apparatus of the former USSR was based on the whole idea of what we're talking about and what these cities that were formed hundreds and sometimes in the Middle East thousands of years ago, they come from a different paradigm. Where Tallinn, that's how it was built. Right, so it was already at the core DNA of what is now what we know as Estonia, a place that's doing some interesting things, both because of the threats, but also because of the way they built their government, is of course Singapore. And the conversations we also need to be having is not just a free-for-all of everything's free or everything's about freedom, because it's not, and everything's not just about technology, and it's not just about networks. At some point, you have to have somebody that can galvanize all the stakeholders, right? And galvanize a way forward where we can put technology where it needs to be, but also keep the human beings where they need to be. And frankly, exactly what Anne said, we're losing the education battle, no matter where it is in the world right now, right? Education in a lot of ways has become indoctrination. And so if you want to look at the technology layer, Singapore's great. You want to look at the education layer, obviously Anne can talk about that, but then we also have to talk about this economic layer. And in my opinion, that's the core of it, right? I'm a geoeconomist, right? A geostrategist. So for me, economics is at the core of how this next world works, because that's where the technologies reside, in private companies. We're still living in a paradigm in London and the UK and America and just about every country where the power lays in politics, right? Geopolitics, not geoeconomics. And that flip of the power going to geoeconomics is going to have systemic repercussions that we're not taking into account. But I believe that a country like what Singapore is doing and the way they built their data infrastructure can absorb that transition.
That's super. And I got my own sort of questions, but the public are pressing quite hard for their questions too. This one goes to Anne, right? You mentioned the value of low-tech solutions that are locally driven. Are there any particular issues that are being technologically addressed in the way that you don't agree with or you think can be improved? Are there ways that is being done that you don't agree with and you think can be massively improved? Sorry, Anne, I think you're muted at the moment, yeah. Sorry, Anne, let me see if we can unmute. See. You have to unmute yourself. You're still muted. Beautiful.
Yeah, I've done it now. I think for me personally, I think technology, it has to be fit for purpose. And I think my personal view is that one of the things that worries me is about technology being everywhere, and it's something that not everybody understands and not everybody can control it, and it might feel that it's controlling you. I mean, we all get, messages on our smartphones about, consumer goods to buy, and it's I think that's very worrying. But I think technology has to fit what we need to do, and I think in terms of education, we have to be asking the question, is the technology for the advancement of humanity, or is it for financial gain and productivity? And I think in learning, we have to do things like deliver inclusive and sustainable education, which includes learning which halts climate change, develops sustainable lifestyles, encourages creativity and critical thinking, teaches us about human rights, gender equality, cultural diversity, all of them things. And I don't think that's quite right yet. And I think during this pandemic, we've learned a lot. I mean, teachers are incredible. I mean, they've really put on a new hat, and they've got into, some classroom learning, some online learning, blended learning, but they need support to do that. You know, teachers aren't technology experts, all of them, so they definitely need the support to do it. And I think what I'd go back to is that, you know, it has to be fit for purpose. There's no point somebody giving me a whole load of iPads to go to the Gambia or Sierra Leone if they haven't got the local curriculum on there, if they're not in local language, and if the people there don't have any electricity to power them up. You know, I mean, I think it has to be a local solution, whether we're in London or whether we're in Port-au-Prince.
I think John's got some thoughts on the question. All right, I was gonna say so in that vein actually, and what do you what some things you think London is doing quite well?
I think that we've got access to information about almost anything if we're privileged enough to have internet access. I think that at the moment you can get access to YouTube, and you can fix almost anything. Access to information at our fingertips. I think we're doing very well with that, but I don't think we're asking the right questions as to how we go forward with this technology in London. I can remember when I was looking forward, it shows my age, but we had a black and white television, and we were very excited to get a colour television. And I think that, you know, technology has really changed in the period, and I can't imagine how much it will change between now and 2050, but I'm learning from you guys today.
Yeah. How about you, Lawrence? I mean, what are some things you think London is doing right? And I got a follow-on question from that point too as well.
It's a very, very broad question. What are we doing right? I mean, we're always been renowned for our technology and engineering. I think the construction industry, as we mentioned before, in sustainability, are doing really good things. We're much more, you know, efficient than we have been previously, using things like BIM and modular building, borrowing from very old kind of Scandinavian practices, which we took a while to adopt. But you know, they're flying, and I think actually, you know, what London is going to have to do better, I know I'm changing the question slightly, but what we're going to have to do better is you know, provide a lot more residential accommodation in the coming decades in the capital rather than commercial space. I think that's going to be a really interesting challenge to make, you know, life for residents and tourists as attractive and as cohesive as possible. I'm not sure, you know, how that's going to play out, but yeah, I mean, London's extremely renowned for its data riches. You know, you've got the London Data Store, which is being updated by the London Mayor soon, and you know, much like Anne said, when it comes to our access to data and how we use data, I know that there are good sides and bad sides, as I'm sure John will kind of point out in the utopian dystopian question around London. There are a lot of benefits to do with data, but I think the main issue at the moment is, you know, how are we using data to benefit ourselves rather than just entertain ourselves or distract ourselves.
Yeah.
There's a lot of distraction. There's a lot of entertainment, but there's not a great deal of education, and of all sectors that need revamping, I would say education is the one that has changed the least in institutional terms. So, you know, to Anne's point again, the revelations of YouTube and Google and being able to find anything at the click of your fingers, it's really down to choice as to whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. Do you kind of waste your time, or do you use it wisely and you know, make the most of it? So I think London's, you know, got a great grasp on engineering and data in particular.
Yeah, and I mean, I think London sort of showed us some strong adaptability, right? We've seen, I think it was Cedars and Crowdcube who've come together to become a one crowd equity platform, just, you know, to build a bigger community, right? So we're seeing, like, and in addition to the Future Fund that was launched by the government, support startups and companies. One of the questions from the community was what do you think is the value of public versus private funding of tech and innovation?
Yeah, it's a good question. But this was for me, right? I'm sorry, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel much more equipped to kind of answer this one. It really does depend on the business, right? There's a company I know and respect very, very highly, which is Marinatex, run by an entrepreneur who's come out of academics, and she's created a bioplastic to replace single-use plastic. You know, for her, she's getting offers from massive conglomerates and huge corporates to kind of snatch that technology, push it through IP, and then you know, out to the commercial market. But her vision is much more about organic growth, which can take a long, long time. And that's where the entrepreneur crisis is around funding. You know, do you look for grants and therefore restrict your activity based on what the grant is being offered for? Do you tap into the Future Fund, for example, that the government's offering, which is a great opportunity for entrepreneurs, but not so much for investors, who obviously want to make tax relief benefits from SEIS and EIS and things like that? You know, are you looking to grow your company and take hold of your company and use it to fund your whole life? In which case, maybe avoid investment if you can. And I think we can all agree, you know, the best type of funding that you can get as a company is sales, organic sales, revenue from customers who like your product because they back you, they support you financially, they do your marketing for you. And if you can avoid giving away equity, it's not very popular as a position, as you can imagine, in the investment market, but you should avoid giving away equity where you can, and take grants and, you know, zero interest options wherever possible. But if you're an Uber or a Deliveroo and your main goal is to commercialize, get an IPO, and then sell the business in 3 years, then by all means go for private funding.
Yeah, and that shows. I mean, at the end of the day, like, when on one side of London you get companies who are not able to raise the adequate support, and you get companies who are able to raise massive amounts of support on some of these crowd equity platform, for example. Or, you know, in the UK, when you go to one part, you worry about the Brexit and the pandemic, but then you go in, you see these massive developments happening at the same time. All right, and this question goes to you, John. So there's always a contrast between different views and realities of London. On one part, you can be very, very disenfranchised, and one side you can be very optimistic. What does the utopian or dystopian vision of London 2050 look like to you?
Sure. So to paint a picture there, if we look at literature and movies, I think we could be entering, and in some respects have already entered, into a world like 1984, Brave New World, films, think of Elysium, Minority Report. And if you look at the themes of that film, one, you have a few entities that are controlling the message. And if you think of social media, and what's happening in the world right now, a lot of that's being manipulated. People don't realize that. And to Lawrence and Gary's point, and also to Anand's point, in the world we live in this post-COVID world, you're having people being siloed, people that are getting, let's say, very emotional over certain issues, not even realizing there might not be a real person that's posting a comment. Then in terms of divide, you talk about digital divide, social divide. What worries me as well is we could be entering a world to the have and the have-nots, where the 1%, let's say, have access to very modern healthcare, technology, but on the other side, you have a lower class that provides the labor and the work without reaping the benefits of the future. So that would be a dystopian view. On the utopian view, we could look at something like Star Trek, where we live in a world that's very interconnected, where we learn to harness technology. There's a couple companies, for instance, that are developing new hypersonic flight. We haven't had something like the Concorde, which was developed in 1972. We haven't had a hypersonic aircraft in years now. So it's exciting to see that these new technologies could be used for the benefit of mankind. But there's essentially two images or two worlds that we could be walking into. And I think if people understand that, and are able to detach and look at the situation more broadly, I think as a society, we'd be better off.
Super, and thank you very much for sharing that. And that leads to even to Garrick. I think you've seen a lot of these major cities, right? From Shanghai to Tokyo, of course, London, and sometimes a lot of these major cities tend to rest on your laurels. And at the end of the day, still London is seen as financial capital of the world right now, right? On the question of the whole utopian, dystopian view of London, what are some of the specific lessons that we can learn to be better in a better place for London as a city or as a state?
Well, thank you, Einstein. There's a quote by Rousseau, and he says, "Cities are the abyss of the human species," right? Because what you have to understand is, for all intents and purposes, cities aren't real. They're manufactured entities that continue to grow and become more convenient, right? But we live in a universe of entropy, which always eats at that perfection, always eats at that convenience. And, it is, my mother always said, very smart woman, when is enough enough? When do you have enough technology? When do you have enough money? When do you have enough buildings? And when do you have enough people in a certain place? Because when you hit a certain tipping point, there's a law of diminishing returns, no matter how much money, how much technology, how much infrastructure, how much intelligence, you name it, whatever you have, it's a law of diminishing returns. And, London's in a unique position because, obviously with Brexit and some of these things from a geopolitical perspective, it makes it unique. From just a geographic perspective, it's unique, which allowed it to become a world power. But at the same time, its core is still in finance, right? And the question becomes, is finance and the London Stock Exchange and a bunch of these things still the core competitive advantage of that city? I would propose to you that it's not. I would propose to you that, as you said before, Einstein, it's the human beings, right? I've lived in many cities all over the world. The complexity of the different backgrounds and heritages that are in London is totally unique. And it's that intermingling. The only thing that makes Silicon Valley successful is because millions and millions of ideas are constantly combining and recombining. Millions of them, not 5, not 10, not 10,000, not 20,000, not 100,000, millions in real time. Those ideas are there in London. Those people are there in London. But to look at things from a math equation perspective, to look at things from a technological perspective first, instead of the core competitive advantage of London, which is the human beings and what's between their two ears, as much as a politician wouldn't want to hear it, and folks from the intelligence and defense world would understand it, working with this London around what's in Londoners' heads, and get them to, stand up and come together. And back to Ann's point about there not being enough funding, and some of the other panelists, when it comes to community banks, instead of looking just straight at finance all the time, there's we don't put people at the core of this. And every conversations that I have about technology, we want to talk about technology and its future, and we want to talk about technology and how much we need of it. So what do we need? Does everybody need a pacemaker next to their heart? Or is that not enough? Or do we need to have an outer body experience? How far do we have to go? How close does technology have to be to us before we realize that the answer is actually ourselves, and the technology is just a platform a platform that accelerates intent of who we are and what we do? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I mean, as we're approaching the time, I don't know where time is just absolutely flown by, and I wish I could speak on for much longer, but we are on a tight schedule, and I do want to have all of you just share a final point to the audience, right? The reason why we reached out to all of you is because you all have a significant personal connection to London, even though your work is global and goes beyond that, right? What can you tell the everyday Londoner walking down Finsbury Square, getting on the tram in Croydon, going past Brixton? What can you tell the everyday Londoner as to what can they do to contribute to the future of London on a personal level? And I'll start with you, and we go around the panelists.
I think it is about investment in education, and it's about being responsible for your own learning. I think that we're in London, even at this moment, we have children who cannot access learning. Children can't learn properly on a smartphone. We have children who are unable to eat and have to go to food banks. And if you can't eat, you can't learn. So what I'd say is I think that we need to go back to basics, and we need to say, what are we doing with technology? We're in a situation now with this pandemic, and it's a global pandemic. So we're all connected. And I think we all need to just think about the questions I said earlier. Is technology just for productivity and for earning, or can we learn better through it? And I think people like yourselves who are leaders in the tech industry, I think you should take them questions back to your communities and ask Londoners about what they think.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. How about you, Lawrence? What can people do to contribute to the future of London on a personal level?
Yeah, again, good question, and an interesting question, because, you know, spaces themselves, cities, towns, you know, the smaller they are, the more of a culture I feel they have, and London just has so many different cultures, right? So speaking to different people from London, you'd be speaking to every single person represented in the world almost if you spoke to everybody there. So a very hard one to unravel. But what I certainly would say is that what technology does allow for, and the future will allow for, is for us to opt into the relationships that we actually want. And that's not necessarily with other individuals, it could be with other platforms. We have more of a luxury now than we ever have had in terms of how we use our time and what we dedicate our time to, and the amount of, you know, the variety of choice that we actually have. So, you know, what I would encourage anybody in London to do is really dedicate time and energies into the things that you genuinely care about, the things that you feel you can make the most positive impact in, and be very open about the relationships that you are able to build. I'm a huge fan of relationships. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on many things, but I would say I'm an expert on building relationships between communities and people. And you know, it's just amazing to see the power of relationships, and that is something that technology hasn't, you know, cut through the heart of. I mean, yes, we're more remote. Yes, we're more lonely typically in our own time because of technology. But, you know, being able to reach out to people that have similar interests has never been easier. And I think that's something that should be really celebrated. You can find people that will back your cause. And, you know, if you've got an idea, come to Sus Ventures for funding, you might get lucky. You're on mic now, Einstein. It's terrible.
I was saying that. Thank you very much, Lawrence. And this goes to our international panelists who fall in love with the local city in many ways. John, you're doing a lot for the city right now through your work with think tanks and your advice. What can you tell the everyday Londoners what they can do to contribute to the city right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, first of all, everyone has value. Whether they realize it or not, everyone has in some way they can contribute. One of the things I'm passionate about is mentorship. And I think right now, where there's a lot of people that are questioning really their future, a lot of people are losing their businesses, a lot of small business owners, a lot of people are facing challenges. And I think with our diverse skill set, everyone has something to contribute, even if it's as simple as volunteering. I'm seeing charities in the UK are facing 80% loss in revenue and operating capability. And that's something that's not sustainable. And I think it's something that should galvanize all of us to try and work together. So whenever this pandemic ends, we're in a better situation than we would have been, I think, if these actions are taken now.
That's super. Thank you so much. Gary, last but not the least, what are your thoughts on what people can do to contribute virtually as well as in person, of course?
Yeah, it's a great question, Einstein, and this is always the core of how people end up getting disenfranchised, right? What can I do as one person? I'll tell you what you can do. I'll tell you, ask yourself this sentence once every day. You will make a large difference for yourself, your family, your community in London, which is, what can I heal? Because remember, technology is just a platform that accelerates intent or it exacerbates holes and wounds. So if you look at how we get to having certain people as prime minister or president, it's because we put technology ahead of humanity. We put ones and zeros ahead of our beating hearts. And we exacerbated and accelerated certain things that we didn't realize were, kind of under the covers. Humanity right now needs a lot of healing. London needs a lot of healing. The world needs a lot of healing. Each and every single one of us, each day, could help heal a bridge with another person or a community or a coalition, and that can take the form of donating time. But once again, technology is just a platform that accelerates intent, nothing more, nothing less. So if you start getting in the business of healing yourself, healing others, and then putting technology on top of that healing, you will bring more light than darkness, and we will never have a dystopia if you focus on the healing side. Thank you.
I can't think of a better way to end this panel. Thank you so much. What can I heal, right? London is a stand-in for many cities around the world because we actually share similarities with other cities around the world. So the lessons I've been mentioning here so far apply to many cities around the world, wherever you are in the world right now. And as one of our attendees mentioned, Pamela Johnson, she says she really appreciates the insights from both a macro level and a micro level, right? And we were very purposeful with finding people and thought leaders who can speak on matters from the advanced tech field to the grassroots level. So thank you all so much for your insights. Please follow our speakers on LinkedIn, on Ann Beattie, Lawrence Grant, John Lundberg, Gary Whitehall. Check out the organizations and connect with them. They would love to share their insights with you as well. Thank you all so much and for being part of this remarkable program. I'll pass the mic on to, and of course, follow Global Startup Ecosystem on LinkedIn as well. Thank you so much. I'll pass the mic on to Ken right now to close the program out for us. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you very much to our panel. Thanks, Einstein. And I'm glad you managed to plug the Global Startup Ecosystem team because, as I said before, none of this would have been possible without them. For those of you who are still here and still listening, our sincere thanks for attending the London 2050 program and for making it everything that it's been. I think it's been a fantastic day of events. I'm just going to take a few minutes just to wrap up in terms of summarizing what I think we've learned today, and then extend some thanks to the teams behind the scenes. I think just building together a couple of themes that really popped out for me. I think there was a running theme throughout all four panels about building locally and making sure that there is a sustainable solution that is implemented to the issues that we face in a way that serves the local community. We heard about the 15-minute city and the kind of policy promise of that, but also the importance of making sure that that's catered to a local community. I really enjoyed seeing the links between the Urban Change and Community Action panel right at the beginning and seeing those themes built into the Arts and Culture panel, the Place in the City, the Real Estate panel. And I think also leading into what we heard from our last panel, the importance of building for the long term. There's a lot of the issues that face London are going to be issues that we face going into London 2050. There's a particular reason why we tilted the marketing of this event towards that, and that's so that we think long term, outside of boom and bust cycles, outside of just political ups and downs, and it's important to both the city and the community that it represents that we do that. But I think the third and final point that really shone for me was really valuing what London is as a city and as a community. In my opening remarks, I talked about the community panel really focusing on the notion of London being a home or an extension of that for both people within and without the city. And I'm one of those people. I was born in India, but I moved to East London when I was very young. I went to university in London. I'm now privileged to be the chair of the LSE Alumni Association, London. And just it's a wonderful experience and a wonderful opportunity to be of service to the city and, you know, the LSE community as a whole. So on that note, I'd just like to thank everyone who is involved, and I've got a list of names here, and I'm going to be linking them to particular panels just so you know who is behind the scenes. So think of this as being, you know, post-credit sequence to a really great movie, which was what I feel today was. So first of all, we had the Creating New London panel, which was organized in collaboration with our friends at LSE London. And the key contacts there were Fanny Blank and Martino Rotolo. Also, Martine Saps was a key student contact there, and really put together a great panel in that regard. Next, we had the Arts and Culture of the Future, which was run by an all-student team, headed by Siba and her friends Qingwen and Maria. So, guys, amazing job with that. I really felt like it felt like being a fly on the wall to some great insider insights to the arts and culture panel. Then we had the Place in the City deep dive into the London real estate sector, but I feel like the panel was a lot more than just that. I feel like we got to have a think about what it would be like to build for the long-term future of London. An excellent panel put together by Didem, Adi, and Simla from the LSE Greg team. And then finally, last but certainly not least, we've just had the City of the Future Technologies that will transform London. That was chaired by Einstein and our wonderful panel that we've just heard from there. In addition to the names that I've just mentioned, we've had a lot of folks behind the scenes, and forgive me, guys, I know you dived in, from GSE, Global Startup Ecosystem, who've been helping behind the scenes to, you know, reach out to speakers, liaising with them, solving tech problems. None of this would have been possible without them. So on behalf of all the LSE groups that have been involved, our sincere thanks to GSE and to Einstein and the whole of the team. I sincerely hope you enjoyed this event as much as I did. It was an absolute pleasure putting this forward. Please do watch this space for more to come from the LSE alumni community, and wish you all a very pleasant evening, and thanks again for attending. Thank you.